like to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited about our symposium today and the opportunities to discuss the relationship between spirituality and our sacred landscapes. And as I was thinking about our symposium today and some of the issues involved, there were a couple of things that kept coming back to my mind. And one was more generally, many of us are really concerned about the climate issues that we're facing and the social issues that are intertwined with those. And sometimes it feels like a really big lift to try to make the change that we need to get enough people on board and collaborating on these different things. And I've been reading a book called Rekindling Life by Baptiste Morisot. He's a French professor of philosophy. And the book is basically about one approach to the landscapes that we share. But he had this to say, which I thought was very helpful. He says, the challenge comes down to inventing levers. A lever is an arrangement, an elegant arrangement, and is probably the first mechanism ever invented, the oldest of all. The function of a lever is to make commensurate two things that are a priori incommensurable. On one side, a hand, on the other, a disproportionately large rock. By sliding a solid branch under the rock and wedging the rock against a solid support, a fulcrum, the animal intelligence that we have inherited can, quote, move the earth, as Archimedes put it. We need Archimedes' levers for large-scale ecological operations, tools commensurate with the situation. We need them at the local level. We need them to be multiple, shareable, and effective. The lever is the only apparatus that can bring hands and the world into communication and can make commensurable a set of actors, you, me, paltry little bit players, and the great adventure of life on Earth, life that has going on for billions of years, this biotic adventure that has made us all. For the action of ecological and evolutionary dynamics has chiseled us in every detail, with our opposable thumbs, the powers of love and curiosity that extend beyond our species, our elegant and ambiguous primate brains, our political capacities for mobilization. All these powers are fundamental legacies of our evolution. Turnabout is fair play. It is time for us to mobilize our living powers to protect the adventure of life that has bestowed them upon us. And I felt that that was a really useful metaphor as we both consider the different issues facing us, the protection of our lands, whether they are wilderness or farmed or where people are living. And the other thing that was really helpful for me in thinking about this topic of sacred stewardship and land was thinking about the vast amount of research that has gone into how nature and wilderness in particular has such a beneficial effect on our well-being when we can access it. And those are well documented. And it seems to me that one of those intersections of spirituality and sacred lands is to really reconnect to that notion that we are part of nature, and that by being part of nature, we can heal as individuals, as a species, as communities, as well as heal the lands and our non-human neighbors that are also dependent on this land for survival. And so I think those two together with the idea that sometimes as an individual or as a small group, we might feel like it's such a big lift and it's going to be really difficult. But that notion of a lever to really pinpoint that part where we can work together and leverage those skills, those communities, those things that we have in order to make that big lift. We don't have to do it on our own, and we can find that strategic point of intervention in order to make the change that we need to see. And that by locating that effort within our larger community of our connection with the land and our connection with our human and non-human neighbors, that we can really make a difference, even if it's just a small thing here or there, but as we work together, that will grow. So those are my thoughts as we go into this, to our symposium today. And we'd like to start off with an invocation. Thank you, Paige. Well, let us go and go ahead and get started. We will start our opening address with Ann Neville, who is the Northern Mountains Regional Director of the Nature Conservancy here in Utah. And so, Ann, if you'll please join us and take it away.
Hi. I guess, okay. All right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate the fact that I can join you all today. One of the things that I'm a little concerned about or kind of is that I can't see you. And and you can see me. And so I want to know a little bit more about you as an audience. And so if you could put, and I think the chat, I thought the chat was supposed to be put on, but I think it's disabled. But if you could put in the question and answer or whatever, so I can know a little bit more about you, about where you're living or where you're from or both. And then can I have you please put in one word that you think describes the intersection of spirituality and land stewardship? Just one word. Try not to be verbose, right? So if you could do that, that would really help me better understand. Oh, good. Okay, so there's some coming in. Let's see. At least I can't see stuff, but all right. Yay, people. Oh, somebody's asked me to repeat it. So tell me where you're from, where you're living, or both, and then one word that describes the intersection of spirituality and land stewardship. Okay. I'm using two screens, so oh good. Chat is on. All right, perfect. All right, so many of you know, and probably this is why you're here, that humans have been modifying the earth since we came into existence. Whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist, humans have been modifying the earth for our basic survival. And survival is hard, right? We instinctively try to make things a lot easier to get food, water, and shelter, life's basic needs. And I would like to say that those basic needs are actual human rights. And all human interactions with nature have a purpose. We make choices to act in hopes that we get a particular desired outcome. Over many years, we have put in place a major infrastructure to make our lives easier for survival. We have waterways and canals to divert water so that we can have clean water to drink and to bathe in and to wash our clothes, electricity grids, buildings that make our lives comfortable, all these networks that are interconnected. But for the most part, when we built this infrastructure, we did not really do this thinking about the consequences to the earth or how it impacts other people that may not be benefited from this infrastructure. Okay, I'm going to just look real quick at some of the things that you're putting down. So thank you so much for contributing. So in my career as an ecologist, I've been really fortunate to be able to address some of these consequences from human decisions and human actions that were made to benefit humans. I was able, and I have been able, to manage a bird refuge right next to Great Salt Lake. Now, Great Salt Lake is in Utah in the United States, and it is a really important stopover place for migratory shorebirds and waterfowl. I mean, globally important. And we found out that in the fall, when there's not much water around, we've had a really hot summer, if we put a little water in some of these dry areas, we would have instant bug soup for these birds to eat. Nature is so cool. So they hired me to ensure that water got to these small ponds or playas, and to protect and to make sure that the shorebirds weren't being bothered while they were using it. Well, the only reason while this shorebird habitat and this bird reserve was created is because a mining company had destroyed 1,000 acres of wetlands so that they could mine copper. So they were addressing that. So just to remind everybody, all of us are using coffee right now. If you're on your phone or your computer or even using electricity, you're using copper. So we are all part of this infrastructure that we have created. Okay, on a bigger scale, right now, I'm working on a potential project. We haven't signed on the dotted line, but we think that it's going to go through. Working in the Uinta Mountains in Utah. It's northeast part of Utah, and it's working with 2 national forests in the state of Utah and the Nature Conservancy. And we're looking at landscape conservation forecasting, which is basically really detailed vegetation maps with also the topography and the aspect and all these different things added in so that we can choose really detailed forest treatments that will help reduce the severity of fire. Because we have been afraid of fire for a very long time, humans have, and we suppressed it for a long time. And it's not working too well for us because we really didn't understand the relationship between fire and forest ecosystems. So this is over a 1 million acre project, and it's going to take 2 to 3 years to complete. And then it's going to have almost 35 years of different actions with running the scenarios over and over so that we understand as things change. And this includes climate change. So the benefit that humans are getting out of this management are clean water, water in the rivers, a timber harvest, recreation, and soil stability. All right, so that is a really exciting project. So on an even bigger scale, I was able to work over 30 years ago in the 1990s. I had the opportunity to assist researchers in the dead zone of the Gulf of Mexico. So the dead zone is really complicated, has a lot of nuances to it. But basically the dead zone is a natural phenomenon where the Mississippi River meets the Gulf of Mexico. So you got to think your geology here. So think of the central United States, all these thousands of tributaries. This is our largest watershed in the United States. All these tributaries, thousands, going into the Mississippi, funneling down, going into the Gulf of Mexico. So each spring, when the water would warm up enough, when the fresh water meets the salt water, everybody's really happy. All the critters, they're going to reproduce, algal bloom, and the things that eat algae, and then it's just going to go crazy. And then when in the water column, as things start going down, and they're using oxygen, right? Because most things need oxygen to live. So as it's going through the water column and dropping down so that the bottom feeders can start eating this wonderful bounty, they use all the oxygen, and they call it a dead zone. It's basically a oxygen-less blob, and it moves around. So why it's a problem for humans is because we've made it bigger. So all these tributaries, we've added fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, industrial uses, and it's just really made that dead zone grow. And why that's a problem is because it's impacted fisheries and shorelines and other major marine systems. And many, many groups are still working on how to reduce those loads to the Gulf, but it is better than it used to be. Again, I'm looking. Right, so these are types of stewardship. Some economic stewardship, ecological, and not much cultural stewardship. And luckily, I think we're going to talk about this later today. So I'm not an expert, so I'm going to hopefully stay tuned that other people are going to be talking about this. So what is land stewardship? Well, way back in the early 1900s, Aldo Leopold figured out that we were not being very respectful of the earth. And he felt that we needed an ethic dealing with humans' relationship to land and the animals and plants that grow upon it. Way back then, they figured out that this was an issue. And Wendell Berry, later on, he's a poet and essayist, and I'm paraphrasing what he said here. Stewardship depends on the interconnected systems of ecology and economics, of politics and science, of sociology and planning. So land stewardship connects land to the community, and the importance just isn't ecological sustainability, but also the sustainability of the social and cultural practices, values, and benefits. So what is the intersection of the spirituality and land stewardship? Well, before I give you an idea to think about, I want to start with the premise. And this premise is that God loves us and provided everything we need to live: water, air, food, shelter, and a savior. So in Genesis, the Lord is creating the earth. He's created Garden Eden, and he's basically telling Adam and Eve, hey, I've given you everything. I've given you herbs, plants, trees, beasts, fowls, everything that runs around on the earth. And in verse 31, in Genesis 1, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. He set us up for success. He set us up so that we could live very well. And God loves us and the world. In John 3, for John so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So with this premise that God loves everyone, and including the earth, I believe that my spiritual intersection with land and stewardship is equity. I cannot believe that God made this absolutely glorious earth for us, and at the same time for there to be so many without life's basic needs, and so much of the earth to be polluted or destroyed. The earth was created to provide enough for all, and for all natural ecosystems to be healthy. So the Lord has given us a lot of instructions, and I don't think I have been reading them very well. So I'm going to give you some ideas of how my research has given us. So in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 82, the Lord is talking to Joseph Smith how to set up Zion, or a place where the pure in heart live. And in verse 16, behold, here is wisdom also in me for your good. And this is advice for anybody. I don't think that the Lord was being exclusionary here, but he's talking to a small amount of people, but I think he's talking to us now. And you are to be equal. Or in other words, you are to have equal claims on the properties for the benefit of managing the concerns of your stewardships. Every man according to his wants and his needs, inasmuch as his wants are just. Every man seeking the interest of his neighbor, and doing all things with an eye single to the glory of God. He said something very similar in Matthew. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I have lived a privileged life. I have tried really hard to be a good steward as part of my family or my ward or my community and as part of my job accountabilities. But I know I haven't thought enough about equity. Like my examples that I showed you in of my experiences in my career, there's different scales of the bird preserve, the forest, and then the Gulf of Mexico. There are scales of where we think we cannot make a difference. But I do think we underestimate ourselves, because often we do not see the immediate results at the scale that we're working. I feel that everything our community leaders, our prophets, our seers, our faith leaders are telling us is that we need to be better at loving our neighbors, from our neighbors across the street, to across the city, to across the state, country, continent, and the world. There is no one group that has the resources no one group that has the resources to solve our dilemma that we face today with climate change, biodiversity loss, and cultural loss. Is it possible that we together can make a difference? Is there a new social norm that we can create together that will spread bigger and bigger, that respects the earth, so people can live more equitably and the earth can be healthy? I really believe we can, but I don't have the answers. Sorry. But I think we're in the right place at the right time. I think groups like MESA and other faith communities and nonprofit groups and political organizations and Native peoples and all of us can come up with examples. And I would love, again, I'd love for you to put in the chat what you think some of those ideas are, how we can work better together. I know some of you have been thinking this for a long time, and obviously MESA has a whole webpage dedicated to that. But maybe some ideas that you put in the chat could be triggers for us to work together better. I really believe we have most of the tools that we need to at least get started. It's not going to be perfect. We need to think really carefully. Well, I at least need to think very carefully about our choices on all the different scales that we can be effective. In the Doctrine and Covenants, back to Doctrine and Covenants again, the Lord is again talking about Zion, where the pure in heart, and that is everyone who has the desire to improve others and the earth. For it is expedient that I, the Lord, should make every man accountable as a steward over earthly blessings, which I have made and prepared for my creatures. I love that the Lord uses us and calls us creatures. I, the Lord, stretched out the heavens and built the earth, and my very handiwork, and all things therein are mine. And it is my purpose to provide for my saints, for all things are mine. But it must be done in mine own way. And behold, this is the way I, the Lord, have decreed to provide for my saints, that the poor shall be exalted, and that the rich are made low. For the earth is full, and there is enough to spare. Yea, I prepared all things, and I have given unto the children of men to be agents unto themselves. Well, at this time, the Lord was talking to a very small amount of people. I feel that now he's talking to all of us. I really thank you for this opportunity to allow me to think about my intersection of spirituality and land stewardship. That I need to be more aware of how my agency may cause inequity for others. I know that I can be a better neighbor as a land steward for the earth and its people. And I thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Anne. That was beautiful. So anyone who has questions, you can put them in the chat, or we can do the raise hand in the Q&A section. That's the preferred place. But if you're having trouble finding it, let us know. But if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's the Q&A icon that you can use, and you can ask any questions for Anne. Thank you, Anne. That was beautiful. I'll start with a question that I have as where people are thinking, which is that what have you found in your own practice is one of the more effective ways to get people thinking along these lines of equity and community and stewardship all coming together and kind of inverting some of the notions that we have about who's responsible and who needs to pay for it and all of that.
You know, a lot of it I have come down to, and it's not easy, is that does it really matter who did it when we still need to act? So I feel like we are all culpable. We're all part of the infrastructure. We're all using it. And so we need to have some personal responsibility. Now, this is how much responsibility that is, because obviously everyone is working very hard and is very busy. And sometimes life is just overwhelming, and some of us can do better at other times. So, but from an overall type of thing is let's not put blame, but more, let's just try to solve the problem. And there is going to be an array of ways that we're going to have to pay for it. And there could be things that we need to give up, or things that so that others can gain. And it's not a one stop shopping, right? We need it all. We need to do everything, but we need to do it in a very, very kind way and not ugly, and because that really doesn't motivate people. It motivates them for maybe a little while, but in the long run, it's not going to motivate them in very long.
Thank you. We do have a question in our Q&A from Paige Checketts, and she asks, how do we talk about equity in a neutral, non-political way?
That's tough. It is really tough, because there's so many, there's the inequity within our own communities, and then within our state. And so it's a very hard way to do that. But honestly, I think going back to being kind and not blaming anyone, but saying, okay, this is the problem. How do I fill the gap? Easier to say than do. I know it's not easy, but we do need to approach it in a neutral way. And I think because the politics are so divisive, then we need to find a workaround so that we get the same things accomplished without making it divisive.
Thank you. It looks like we have another question in the chat from Ian in Texas. He says, things looked pretty bleak for the Great Salt Lake last year. Out here in Texas, he's not sure. He would like to know, how much have things improved with the wetter winter last year?
So the good news is that the Great Salt Lake recovered, and most natural systems are fairly resilient. There are tipping points, and there is a possibility that, and we came very close to that tipping point that year. We did not cross it on all levels. There were some places in the lake we did cross it, but the lake really rebounded well. The brine shrimp recovered, some of the brine flies recovered. And I do feel that the lake is doing pretty well. It still needs a lot of work. No, I'm not saying that we're done, but we got to reprove.
Definitely. Thank you. We have another question from an anonymous participant who says, being Mormon and an environmental steward seems like a double whammy when trying to establish new social norms. What other non-religious organizations are making strides that we can support?
Well, I think some of the people on our panels later today are going to talk about a few of those things. And there, I think there's Catherine Hayhoe is the Nature Conservancy's lead scientist, and she's talked a lot about climate, and she's talked a lot in her is it Episcopalian or Protestant? Oh, sorry. Her communities, and she has a religious blog, and so very much there are other groups that we can follow. Catherine Hayhoe has a newsletter you can get every week, and so that we can follow those types of opportunities for other people and join in with other people, and again, to be collaborative And we need, all of us need to work. It's not no one group is going to be able to solve the problem. We all have to work together.
Thank you. We're big fans of Catherine Hayhoe here. We actually co-hosted her a couple of years ago. We've got the video on our YouTube channel. But she really has some great ideas, especially in her book, Saving Us. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but highly recommend.
I have.
And then our last question is from David Arnold. He says, the Great Salt Lake is divided by the railway causeway. What are the increased dangers to the north side of the lake?
Awesome thought and question. So when the lake was high, we thought that the railroad was an evil, horrible thing that really screwed up Great Salt Lake. And when the lake was low, it was our savior because it actually saved the South Arm from being too salty and really crashed the system because it held back a lot of salt. So the North Arm has critters in it that have their own little ecosystem. And they are doing quite well. They're extremophiles, right? They have very extreme salt and sometimes heat, and they're doing okay. It is not necessarily the same ecosystem that is in the South Arm that has the brine shrimp, brine flies, and the migratory birds that visit there. So a lot of people don't like to say that the North Arm is dead. They don't want to exclude it. And I don't ever want to exclude that part of Great Salt Lake. But it probably won't recover unless the lake gets as high as it did in the 80s. And I lived through that. So many of you didn't when the lake came up. So that I probably won't live through another one, another flood. But that probably, I feel, is going to be resilient. And when we get more water, it will come back to life. And it will actually, again, it's going to destroy the extremophiles habitat, but there's always change. Nature is never static.
Thank you. We do have one last 11th hour question here. Gordon Rands wants to know, are there legislative efforts, local or state, to improve water efficiency, such as requiring or incentivizing low-flow toilets, shower heads, sprinklers, gray water systems?
Absolutely, there is a ton of places, and I hopefully maybe Galen will be talking a little bit about some of the politics and the policies that are coming in. But yes, short answer: the things are happening in that regard, and they're trying to make it voluntary because we react way better when it's a voluntary action than we're told what to do. And so we're also working on, I saw a question about water law and policies. We're putting a lot of things in place so that we have the infrastructure or the process to be able to do and get water to Great Salt Lake and water for nature. Those are all in place. It's slow. It seems really, really, really slow, but this is hundreds of years of legislation and policy that has been in place that we're changing in baby steps that will eventually make a difference. I know it seems very frustrating and that you want to do more right now. And if you want tyranny, it might happen, but I don't think that's really the way we want to go, because I think most of us would rebel.
Thank you, Anne. I think there are some more questions that maybe we can address later, but thank you so much for your inspiring presentation and for answering those questions. And we really appreciate your being on here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. We will go on to the next section of our symposium. And before we start our first general session, we would like to have a land acknowledgement, and Mark Coles-Ritchie, who's on the board of MESA, will offer that. Mark?
Thank you, Rachel. Though we are gathered together virtually, many of us are in Utah, which are the ancestral lands of indigenous people who have lived here since time immemorial, sustained entirely by the plants, animals, and waters of this landscape, including the Great Salt Lake. We acknowledge that these indigenous people continue to live on these lands and have a deep connection to this landscape. Those tribes include the Ute, Paiute, Goshute, and Timpanogos people in the Salt Lake region, as well as other tribes in the broader region, including Hopi, Zuni, Ute Mountain Ute, Diné or Navajo, Apache, and the Pueblo tribes, among many others. We acknowledge the suffering that was inflicted on indigenous peoples because of Anglo settlement. We desire to support indigenous communities and their connection to their ancestral homelands, particularly lands now managed by the federal government. We desire that all people better understand the indigenous history and land stewardship wherever they are, and increase efforts to maintain or restore connection to these lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We'll now go ahead to our first general session, which is what is our moral imperative for protecting critical and sacred lands? And I will turn the time over to Jared Higgs, who is another board member, and he will be the moderator for this session. Jared, take it away. You need to turn off your mute.
Okay, there we go. All right. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Anne, for your talk. We appreciate it. I especially like what you have to say about coming together in spite of ideological differences. For this first speaker, actually, before we get going into that, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Jared Higgs. I'm on the MESA board and kind of a nobody just trying to make a good difference. And our first speaker for this panel will be Nicole Milovitz, who is the Utah outreach organizer for the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. Nicole is originally from Salt Lake City, Utah, and recently moved back to the city from Jackson, Wyoming. Throughout her life, the desert has been one of the most important places on earth to her. She feels most herself walking through quiet desert washes and scrambling up sandstone faces. Nicole graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder with a degree in environmental studies and is passionate about environmental activism, public land management, and environmental justice. She has worked in the conservation, education, and journalism fields and spends her free time hiking, skiing, and camping across the West. So we're very excited to welcome her. Before we get going, just a few quick things. For each of our panelists, we will have a Q&A session at the very end after our third panelist. And to kind of get us started, there will be a link put into the chat where you can respond to the following question. In one word, name something in the natural world that gives you a sense of awe. And with that, we'll let Nicole take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to take a moment and share my screen if that works with you, Jared. Let's see. Are folks able to see that?
Yep, I can see it just fine.
Okay, great. So yeah, hello, my name is Nicole Milovitz. Thanks for the introduction. It's always weird having your bio read out loud to you. And I'm here to talk a little bit about the Utah desert and the work of the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, as well as working in the conversation about our moral imperative and what we talk about and think about when we talk through the climate crisis. So we'll get going. So kind of in a nutshell, SUA's work, SUA stands for the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, is tirelessly protecting wilderness quality land in the Utah desert. We'll look through kind of the different areas in the state we're working to protect and our focal piece of legislation that we use to do so. But for this session especially, I wanted to take a few moments just to touch on the moral imperative question. And I think for me, it breaks down into three parts. The first being helping to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. Personally, I see the act of designating wilderness and protecting wilderness as a way to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. And this is SUA's belief. When we protect large landscapes, we retain carbon sequestration benefits, we provide habitat and provide habitat for really critical cultural or provide habitat for critically endangered and endemic species, as well as protecting cultural sites for Indigenous communities. And then kind of the third area I want to touch on is this idea of designating wilderness as an act of humility. I think that protecting wilderness and working on wilderness is a way to sit with the land. It's a way to be in a give and take relationship with the land instead of just a take. And it's kind of a way that we can set ourselves up for success when we talk about the climate crisis and what our future looks like. So I'm going to see if I can click through. These are just a couple pictures of the Utah desert and lands that my conservation group is working to protect. Some beautiful sites. Sort of the main piece of SUA's work centers around America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. So this is a citizen's proposal for designating close to 8.2 million acres of wilderness across the state of Utah. You can see the majority of land is, one second, you can see the majority of land is in southern Utah, as well as the West Desert. And a lot of these areas in southern Utah are sort of filling in the pieces and spaces in between our national parks and national monuments. And this kind of goes into this idea we'll touch on further, but the idea of landscape connectivity. So when we protect huge swaths of wilderness quality land, we are creating a connected landscape. We are creating land that is able to really properly sequester carbon and provide critical habitat and protect cultural sites, and also really showing that when we protect broad landscapes, incredible things happen for our state in general from an ecological standpoint. So yeah, this is a citizens inventory, and a lot of our work focuses around this. We introduced this piece of legislation at a national level to build robust support for this act across the country, kind of going into that idea that these are public lands for all Americans to be a part of that movement. So moving along. Oops. I forgot for this one, I have to click through quickly. I want to touch on the clarification of wilderness designation. When I began my role at SUA, I wasn't entirely sure. Oops, I got to go back. What classified as wilderness and what didn't. So, wilderness is designated at a congressional level, and has a piece of land must fit these criteria in order to be considered and designated as wilderness. So having minimal human imprint is really important. We can't be working to designate lands that are already completely developed. This is kind of why we feel a race against the clock. When we talk about the climate crisis, when we talk about wilderness preservation, once a piece of land has extractive uses on it, is being overconsumed, it no longer fits this criteria of minimal human imprint. And so that would strip its ability to be designated as wilderness. And then opportunities for unconfined recreation. We'll talk about this a bit more later on, but primitive examples of recreation include walking, backpacking, and really recreating responsibly in these areas. A parcel of land needs to be at least 5,000 acres in size, and it needs to be largely a roadless area. And then it needs to have educational, scientific, and historical and cultural value. And this is, based on kind of where the land is and what we're talking about, this can be more of a flexible definition as well. Something I want to bring up, let's talk about climate change right here in Utah. I know our keynote was talking this morning about the Great Salt Lake. That's a very large problem we're facing in the Salt Lake City Valley. And kind of when we look at Utah as a whole, we sit in a really unique position in our state because we have a lot of wilderness quality public lands, and we're also a large contributor to the climate crisis with those extractive uses. And I think this kind of goes into that idea of, our moral responsibility. We in Utah are in a really unique position, and we kind of get to be in a more of a deciding role of how we want to use these spaces, how we want to protect them, and kind of what our responsibility is to that, to the earth, to each other, to the environmental movement, and to future generations. So I'm now going to touch on a few examples of what's happening on our public lands and kind of these efforts that SUA is taking to remediate. So, we're frequently our own worst enemy. Upsetting statistic is that the US is losing a football field of functioning habitat at the rate of every 30 seconds. This is an example of when we prioritize unconfined recreation over conservation. The two terms aren't interchangeable. Recreation is important. It's important for folks to be able to recreate on public lands, and also conservation is sort of even more important when we look at the climate crisis and the situation that we as a society are currently in. So this is an example of excessive ORV use, off-road vehicle usage on public lands, and really needing to strike a thoughtful balance between conservation and recreation, and make sure we have some areas for folks to recreate on, some trails and pathways to recreate, but allowing people to recreate wherever they want, whenever they want, however they want, at the risk of these critical riparian ecosystems and at the risk of cultural sites and habitat for animals is not the right choice. This is an example of a practice happening on public lands called chaining. This involves essentially the clear cutting of pinyon pine forests, which are the most common forests in southern Utah. So this practice involves having a weighted chain dragged between two tractors and essentially clear cutting these forests. This is largely to make the ground more amenable for cattle and ranching practices. And so this is something that SUA has engaged in a lot of litigation against to really make sure that we're preserving these pinyon pine, juniper groves, and all the habitat that they provide for the Utah desert. I want to talk for a few moments just about animals in the Utah desert. When we think about the desert, maybe big animals and migratory pathways aren't the first thing that come to mind. And, since beginning my role at SUA and learning about the Utah desert, this has been a really beautiful wake-up call. So we have the desert tortoise here. We have a beautiful burrowing owl. And yeah, we're in quite the state when we talk about our bird populations and animal populations in general. And so kind of moving on to this next slide, a lot of the work that ARWA, America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, and the work SUA is doing is to protect these migratory pathways. So we see large mammals migrating from the Sawtooth Range, the Tetons, Yellowstone, Rocky Mountain National Park, and kind of the high alpine in Colorado, the San Juans in southern Colorado, all the way through Utah. So it's pretty incredible that we have 5 major migratory pathways just within our state. And some of these animals that are migrating, mule deer, pronghorn, elk, black bears. I've personally never seen a black bear in the desert and would love to. And so passing America's Red Rock Wilderness Act really is a step in the right direction to protecting habitat for these animals. This is another beautiful shot of your public lands, America's public lands, and kind of the work we're doing to protect them. Just think this photo is really stunning. Whoops. I want to take a few moments to talk about the biological soil crust. In the past, you maybe heard it called the cryptobiotic soil. It's recently been renamed. And, protecting the Utah desert also involves protecting this soil. This is a living soil that provides support for plants and animals. One of the most important things it does is hold moisture and controlling dust. It's no surprise to anybody that the Western United States is in a drought. We, talk about drought when we talk about the Great Salt Lake as well. And so protecting this biological soil and holding moisture in for these desert ecosystems that don't need quite as much water as, some of the coniferous forests we have in northern Utah is really important. And when we talk about dust control, extractive uses destroy the biological soil crust and kick up a lot of dust. This dust then is transposed over across state borders, into Colorado on those mountain ranges, which really exacerbates the melting happening in the spring, which kind of leads to major floods happening and then pushing us further and further into those drought conditions. So when we don't use this land extractively, when we protect it, we're having less dust storms, we're having less dust on major snowpacks, which is leading to less flooding and then drought conditions. And also, you know, this is kind of a recent misperception is when we think about protecting the Utah desert, you know, some of the questions I'll get is what's there? Why? What's the point in protecting it? You know, and so Sue is working really hard to kind of change this misperception that desert ecosystems lack the capacity to store carbon. The desert is a major carbon sink, and it's a major carbon sink if the landscape is intact, you know, and healthy. So pinyon, pine, juniper groves store immense amounts of carbon. The biological soil crust stores immense amounts of carbon. And this is, you know, still a new practice where I'm really interested and excited to see more and more novel science coming out about this, looking at the desert and the protection of the desert as a tool to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. Yeah, and I kind of just wanted to touch on, you know, the work that Sue is doing with Indigenous communities. I think that you know, protecting wilderness includes the protection of cultural resources and access that Indigenous communities have had to this land. And when we talk about the wilderness movement, I think, you know, it's more vital than ever to elevate and support Indigenous communities and their voices and their wishes. You know, upcoming will be the Bears Ears Management Plan will be coming out shortly. And, you know, it's more important than ever to really let Indigenous communities and leaders be the leaders in that space and offer what we can as an environmental nonprofit to really help support that mission and that vision, and also know when we don't need to necessarily be the number one leader in that fight and conversation. And I think that goes, you know, back into this conversation of our moral imperative when we talk about wilderness and the history of the environmental movement and how we can move forward and really incorporate environmental justice. You know, I believe wilderness preservation and designation need to be part of the conversation for environmental justice and climate justice. And I think working with Indigenous communities is a great way to do that. SUA has the support of the Hopi Nation and the Navajo Nation on America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, which is pretty incredible. And we're working as much as possible with Indigenous communities to continue to elevate those voices. Let's see. Yeah, and so this is the last slide I have, and I guess I just wanted to thank everybody for letting me come and chat about wilderness preservation and our movement. We are, you know, largely a grassroots movement. We believe any and all people should be involved in our movement, and if you're interested in getting involved and learning more about SUA's mission, please check out our website or feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, and thank you all so much for letting me connect today. I'll go ahead and stop my screen share.
Thank you, Nicole. That was amazing to hear from you. Just a quick reminder to respond to the link and prompt in the chat as you listen, and continue to add your questions into the chat as well. Our next speaker is Dr. Robert Tabor, who is an associate professor of history at Fayetteville State University, the co-founder of the LDS Democracy Network, and co-author of a weekly newsletter. Rob has spent the last 7 years supporting and mobilizing Latter-day Saints civil engagement, including as the national co-chair of LDS Dems, the director of Latter-day Saints for Biden-Harris, and twice a panelist at the Democratic National Convention. From February through August 2023, he spent a sabbatical serving as an advisor in the U.S. Department of Education's Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. He lives in Fayetteville with his wife, Sarah, and their daughter. And with that, take it away, Rob.
Thanks, Jared. It's great to be here with you and with everyone this morning. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Great. So I'll be speaking primarily today from my own LDS Christian perspective, my work as a historian, and the 10 plus years I've spent in interfaith and interspiritual engagement with people from a spread of religious, secular, and spiritual backgrounds and perspectives. Just a quick disclaimer up top, while I dip into scriptures and general conference talks, what I'm sharing today are my own personal views and not the views of the church or any organization, employer, or campaign with which I am affiliated. Today, I'm going to discuss first the connection in LDS thought between being righteous and prospering in the land, and then explore what LDS commitments should be in two prongs of how we think about federally protected land. First, general disputes over public lands and the specific needs to protect sacred lands. To begin today, a core message of the Book of Mormon is that if we're righteous, we, quote, prosper in the land. And one of the great temptations for Latter-day Saints, much like Nephites before us, is to misread this framework and thus misread what our relationship with the land and water and air ought to be. And I realize that to a certain amount, I am preaching to the choir here, but as the great Toby Ziegler once said during an episode of West Wing, this is how you get the choir to sing. So I personally find the Book of Mormon fascinating because while Joseph Smith taught that the Book of Mormon is the most correct book, it is also an account of societies that failed. These failures are laid out clearly in the dynamics of the pride cycle. I also tend toward a different sort of reading of Mormon 9:31. Here's Moroni, one of the times he thought he was closing out the record, asking us not to condemn him or his father or earlier writers because of their imperfections. Instead, he encourages us when we see these imperfections to give thanks to God for letting us see these imperfections because it allows us to be wiser than they were. There's a tendency sometimes to read this verse as wry irony. How could we ever measure up to the prophets of the Book of Mormon? But given what was going on in Moroni's life, what he had seen, the anguish he so clearly carried with him, I believe Moroni was sincere and afraid that we would reject the whole story because of their failures. I mention these readings because the dynamic between being righteous and being blessed in the land, or keeping the commandments and prospering in the land, as is laid out in Alma 9:13, is very easy to proof text or wrest in rather dangerous ways. The first is a theology of a vending machine God, where we pay with obedience checklists and receive money in return, or even worse, use our own financial security as evidence that we are keeping the commandments. The prosperity gospel approach that I feel pretty safe judging as heresy. What's more, I've seen fellow Latter-day Saints parse 2 Nephi chapter 1, one of the more detailed explanations of this covenant, to justify the so-called doctrine of domination, a heretical misreading of the Great Commission of Matthew 28, to see it as a command to spread Christianity by the sword, or to use the apparent lack of religious commitment by others to deprive them of their own liberty. This has been used across history to justify the transatlantic slave trade, European colonialism in a lot of domains, including settler colonialism in the United States and across the Americas in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. 2 Nephi 1 can also be taken to justify a radical laissez-faire libertarianism, an unchecked quote-unquote liberty for those with power and means, rather than the liberty that comes from a society working together for the general welfare. Development is freedom, as Amartya Sen put it, and which Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and Alistair Smith's Dictator's Handbook shows, depends on broad-based democratic participation, including support for the poor, wise joint stewardship of land and natural resources, and seeking to live peaceably, humbly, and inclusively in a diverse society built on justice and fairness. Finally, peacemaking is a core theme of the Book of Mormon and cannot be divorced from this covenant. I see peacemaking in the frame famously laid out by Dr. King in his letter from Birmingham jail as not the absence of tension, but rather the presence of justice. All right, so with all that said, what should the Latter-day Saint Christian approach to the land, and especially public lands, actually be? First off, we shouldn't be bound to tradition, partisan political arguments, or particular tropes of agrarian masculinity, and we should recognize when other people are. While public land is most common in the interior West, I note that over half of California is public land, and that Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, and even New Jersey all rank in the top 20 states for percentage of land that is in the federal government's hands. I'm here today as a North Carolinian. We're 26th in public land, 15% of our state's area, and it's just not on the political radar in the same way that it is in Utah, Arizona, Idaho, Oregon, Nevada. It's not a continual flashpoint. And when it is out West, it's often more about settler colonial identity politics and the doctrine of domination than Christianity per se. Basically, it means these fights are about money, power, and status. Among Anglo-Americans, setting aside public lands tends to be most controversial among ranchers and people with a financial stake in extractive industries like oil, gas, and mining. As Joshua Specht, historian at Notre Dame, points out, one reason some ranchers dislike public lands so much is because ranching in general, and cattle ranching specifically, is a great way to grab a lot of land for oneself. This is his book, Red Meat Republic. Certain ranchers present these land grabs along with an Ammon Bundy-like distress when they have to pay even minimal rents to graze their cattle on the public's land, with a lot of talk about liberty, stewardship, and how we should just trust and support their dreams to, well, own lots of land and sell lots of meat. These same arguments also happen, we hear them from oil, gas, and other mining interests, but there's no porterhouse steak at the end, so there's less romanticism involved. They'll make claims about jobs, but I think this is a very narrow view of jobs and economic development alike. So many of these debates about public land are, at the end of the day, political arguments about access to money and power and resources, which means that we have to turn to the LDS ethic of politics. And by this, I do not mean vote Republican. Here are 4 principles I see as undergirding the ethic of what it means to be politically engaged Latter-day Saints. The first principle is just we should be engaged. Latter-day Saints should not debate or discuss partisan politics within our meeting houses or within the context of ward life, but we are obligated to participate in civic life, including the functioning of a pluralistic democracy. I think here especially of Doctrine and Covenants 58, the revelation given to the Colesville Saints, including the point that we should not sit around and wait to be commanded in all things, but rather be anxiously engaged in a good cause and do many things of our own free will and bring to pass much righteousness. In this engagement, we must be reflective and thoughtful about how we approach any question of public policy, to neither refuse new information nor to shirk away from that engagement. Principle 2, people are welcome to speak, and we're welcome to listen. But as Latter-day Saints, we should look at what people do rather than just what they say. Show you my faith by my works, judge by the fruits. Or as Joseph Smith put it after hearing about a family who lost their property in a fire, I feel sorry for this brother to the amount of $5. Principle 3, we work political questions out in the public sphere through the constitutional democratic system we are ever perfecting. President Oaks reiterated 5 key pillars of the system during the April 2021 General Conference. They are 1, the source of government power is the people. 2, power is delegated between different levels of government. 3, power is further split between the legislative, judicial, and executive branches, which is something that I know the Utah State Legislature has been struggling with as a concept. The North Carolina State Legislature has been struggling as well. 4, we enjoy vital guarantees of individual rights and limits of government authority. 5, we're to be governed by laws, not individuals. We should be equal before the law and accountable to it and support the separation of powers. The 4th principle in this ethic is that we are not under a divine or ecclesiastical mandate to support a particular party or politician. In fact, this past June, the church's first presidency reiterated merely voting a straight ticket or voting based on tradition without careful study of the candidates and their positions on important issues is a threat to democracy and inconsistent with revealed standards, and pointed to the standard in Doctrine and Covenants 98 of supporting people we consider to be honest, wise, and good. Nowhere in these 4 principles is we must provide public funds to pay for someone's dream to own lots of land and or sell us lots of meat. Or as my wife Sarah says on the campaign trail, folks are free to pursue their dreams, but we don't have to have taxpayers fund them. Now, not all of the debates about public lands are exclusively about access to money or power. And we're going to be talking about this much more today, but here I want to touch on why the creation of these new monuments in Utah and Arizona should be particularly important and celebrated by Latter-day Saints. The LDS commitment to freedom of religion stretches back to at least the 11th article of faith. We claim the privilege of worshiping according to the dictates of our own conscience and allow all the same privilege, let them worship how, where, or what they may. Historically, the United States has done a terrible job of respecting the religious liberty of Native individuals and nations. Forced removals, residential schools, deliberate disruption of language and cultural transmission between generations, and a very narrow view by Christian leaders, law schools, and the federal government, including the Supreme Court, of which religious and spiritual practices count under the First Amendment, have combined to reduce the ability of Native nations to use freedom of religion arguments to protect their access to and protection of sacred lands. Over the last 10 years, in part due to the rise of social media, Native individuals and tribes have been able to raise greater awareness across the United States and around the world about threats to sacred lands from especially oil and gas development. Most notable was the effort by youth from the Standing Rock tribe to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline from running under a lake on their reservation, construction that also threatened sacred lands. In the closing months of President Obama's administration, the Army Corps of Engineers blocked the project, but that was reversed the next month by the Trump administration. One of the most prominent current disputes is over Oak Flat in Arizona, which Ambassador Jeff Flake, when he was a senator, partially opened to mining despite its sacredness to many Arizona tribes. This background is important for recognizing the significance of the Biden-Harris administration protecting sacred lands in Arizona and Utah. While definitions of freedom of religion differ, there's no universally agreed upon standard. If Latter-day Saints believe that we are all alike unto God, then we should take claims to sacrality as seriously as we expect them to be taken. Just this past week, when Pakistan's ambassador to the United States asked Elder Dieter Uchtdorf for the location of LDS Christians' Mecca, he replied, "You might say we have many Meccas. Our temples are our places of most sacred worship." According to a recent poll, 73% of Latter-day Saints say they feel a, quote, deep spiritual connection with nature. The least we can do is respect when our neighbors say the same and extend some understanding, if not celebration or appreciation, when people win long-sought protection of the lands they hold sacred. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. That was awesome. I liked it all. Thank you for sharing that with us. Just a quick reminder again, if you have any questions for these participants, please post them in the chat, and don't forget to click on that link and enter your response to the prompt. All right, so our next speaker will be Danielle Gilmore. Danielle has dedicated her talents and expertise to creating holistic healing modalities, bringing balance to the body's energetic, physical, and emotional systems. Her classes, workshops, and retreats have helped men and women across the world develop tools to empower their lives. As an experienced teacher and facilitator of dynamic movement, sound healing, breath work, and meditation, she holds space for students to transform with love. Her teaching philosophy is inspired by multiple disciplines and traditions, empowering her clients and students to take greater ownership and responsibility for their lives and consciously create their reality. Danielle, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
There we go. Can you hear me and see me? Wonderful. I am so honored to be in this space with you all. I have deeply appreciated Anne, Nicole, and Robert sharing their words of wisdom and intelligence. I didn't know organizations like this existed, and so it deeply fills my soul to be connected, and I have a lot to learn, and I'm grateful to be here. So good morning, brothers and sisters. I've been asked to speak on cultural stewardship, and as a lover of words, I decided to begin with understanding the definition of culture. And culture is defined as the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of racial, religious, or social groups. Also, it is the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or organization. So just right there, I'm so grateful for our Latter-day Saint knowledge, our Christian knowledge, that we are all sons and daughters of loving heavenly parents. And with that, we are all interconnected. We are all related. And so we have a culture as a religion, as a humanity. We have culture from our various understandings from different areas of the country, of the world, that we tie into. And instead of being possessors of them, as we give respect to these cultures, we can come as an offering with information, with resources to share. And that leads me to cultivation. And when we start to understand the beauty that we hold individually, the whisperings of the Spirit, the teachings of our ancestors, the stories that we carry in our hearts and our souls, and we come together in places like this with offerings to share, we can lift each other up and we can develop a culture of love. And so I was asked to speak to you on sharing our cultural connection. And it was from a talk that I gave at state conference. And to be honest, I was super nervous to share my voice and play my note in Stake Center. And I came up with a commitment within myself to be true to what I know, right? And it doesn't always land with everybody, but I'm committed to play my note. And so I would love to sit with you and share excerpts of the talk that I gave and have an open heart. So I am grateful to be here. I feel like this is a little corner of the universe that we're sitting in together. And a little background on myself. I have been blessed to walk this earth for 47 years, and I have had the privilege of being married to my husband, Justice, for almost 25 years. And in that time, I have had 4 children who are now 25 through 16. I was born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I was blessed with 2 incredible parents who poured their heart and soul into our family. They blessed me with an amazing blueprint of how I wanted to live and create a family. And I went to BYU where I studied psychology. I met my husband, I graduated and began our family as we moved to Arizona, living in the MESA area. I found myself for the first time in my life, except for my college years, surrounded by a community of mostly LDS people. Justice and I were so excited to settle and raise our family there. For 23 years, we are blessed to be among a Christ-centered community, and this provided a rich and firm foundation to stand and grow upon. During this time, we were blessed with many challenging and beautiful experiences that included conversations around mental and physical and spiritual health. After 15 years I experienced as a stay-at-home mother of 4, I began to feel disconnected from the other aspects of myself, the parts that existed outside of the role as a wife and as a mother. I began to feel an emptiness and a longing for a deeper connection within. How could I pour into my family as my cup began to feel empty? I had many questions stirring in my heart. I remember walking into my husband's office one day with tears in my eyes and scriptures in my hand and asking him, where is she? Where is my Heavenly Mother? He shared his knowing of her with me. He just knew her. Through his mother and his Navajo culture, he knew her. That filled my heart and comforted my soul and encouraged me to search. I went into my room and fell to my knees, pleading to know my Heavenly Mother. I was called to the earth, laying like a starfish, belly down, heart open, navel connected. I wept and I laid. My mama heart was tired and was full of self-doubt. I felt lost of myself. In this tender moment, I heard, find your voice. Find my voice? What does that even mean? In the years to follow, I learned that my body is an instrument and that in the hands of God, I can choose to tune in this instrument. I can listen to her, I can feel her and see her, and not with my eyes, but through the eyes of God, Father and Mother. And as I learned how to tune my instrument and to become in tune, I was led to know Jesus in ways that have been among the greatest treasures in my life. My voice, shaky and high-pitched, began to settle into my belly, anchored and firm as I came to know truth and light. As I opened the vessel of my being, as I allowed the brokenness to be explored with a broken heart and a contrite spirit, the image of a mirror came to me. I was not content with the image staring back at me. It was not my authentic self. She wore a mask that allowed her to fit in. She spoke with a superficial voice that conveyed that everything is okay. She was afraid of being seen for who she was and how she thought and how she spoke on the inside. In this vision, I took a gray rock in the palm of my hand and I threw it at the mirror. As the mirror shattered into many pieces, the fragmented pieces of my reflection laid on the ground. My immediate reaction was to pick them all up, put it back together quickly. Everything was okay. And then one of my favorite songs came to mind. Have you received his image in your countenance? Does the light of Christ shine in your eyes? Will he know you when he comes again? Because you will be like him. I knew I had work to do. I was ready and willing to begin the self-inquiry and self-healing with my Savior and friend. When I asked to know Mother, She pointed me to Jesus. This began my new journey of transformation through the atonement. I began to pick up the pieces of this newfound perspective. I could choose what I picked up and continue to create with, and what I would leave behind. And the best part of this was that it was not a one-time experience. I cracked open my vessel over and over again, each time leaving versions of my old self, patterns, shame, fear, and doubt, and each time reaching for more reflections from my Savior, more compassion, more forgiveness, more light, and more love. As the song continues, when he sees you, will the Father know his child by his everlasting image in your eyes. This work is not complete. So together, I invite us to take a deep breath, breathing into your nose, maybe closing your eyes, filling your body up with fresh energy, spirit, feeling the earth beneath you and the air around you. And as you exhale, releasing stuck, stored tension, fear, doubt, shame, disbelief, and continuing that process, breathing in light and love, and releasing tension. Continue to breathe as your body naturally cleanses and purifies. Our elemental constitution is beautiful and wondrous and unique in its expression in each of us. Which brings me to this topic in this symposium. When we are in relationship to nature, we are in relationship with everything. Our energy is sacred, and nature outside can be a beautiful reminder of the cycles of life and death, cycles of creation and renewal. Here in fall, the leaves are magnificent and a beautiful portrayal of letting go. After a season of growth and experience, they boldly play their final notes in brilliant shades of orange and yellow and magenta. And then they gracefully let go and whisk gently to the ground, where their held nourishment, their wisdom, becomes one again with the earth, creating fertilizer for future seasons. May we be like the leaves. May we be held and supported by the earth as we walk in beauty. Not her beauty or his beauty or their beauty, but our unique beauty. May we walk with presence, feet in the earth, and like the leaves, boldly sing our note. As we receive the image of nature, may we mirror this harmony and this balance, these cycles of life. May we be like the ocean, moving through the seasons of life that ebbs and flows, and the steadiness and grace. May the cleansing water facilitate waves of creation and creativity, also connecting us to waves of healing and tears of compassion and forgiveness. As I continue to understand my unique relationship and harmony and balance, as I cultivate this relationship, I'm so grateful for the earth around us, to be able to learn from it, to witness, to study, to observe, and to step into action of protection. I realize that this is a relationship that I've learned from the practice of yoga, meaning to yoke, to bring together. And I'm grateful that as my eyes begin to open and my mind and my heart become unified and attuned to the vibration of harmony and balance, I'm able to experience more light, more love, more vitality and energy. And I am grateful that I can return to the earth to seek refuge, to learn and to listen, to become quiet. And it is through movement, through breath, and through stillness that we can learn and come into attunement with the vibrations, the harmony and balance of our Savior. Hear our body and our mind and our spirit understand truth. They testify of light and love. And when we are in relationship with our energy, we are in relationship with nature, with creation. And from this space, we can share. we can cultivate an inner culture of harmony and balance and lift each other up. So I ask you, with your eyes closed and your heart open, with a childlike curiosity, what is your relationship with the earth in your body? How does the water in your body move? What does fire in your body feel like? Do you notice when you are breathing and holding your breath? What does the air feel like in the body? May the purification of fire pulse within your veins, continually fueling our bodies with life, cleansing, and purification. May the air of your breath be a constant connection to spirit, that we might commune with God, breath by breath, that we might draw closer to remember who we truly are. And we might share through testimony spoken and felt of the divine nature that we are all instruments in the hands of God, creations of miracle and majesty, that our images may come into continual renewal and transformation to emulate the light of Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters, where is your joy? What is your understanding of your internal connection to culture and harmony and balance of the earth, of your elemental and constitution, your divine nature? May we remember who we are. May we connect within the vibrations of love as we come to understand our divine nature and process atonement. That through the constant process of releasing and receiving, we may connect to our own mosaic of art in process, not perfection. In process, proclaiming to the world our testimony of our Savior, Jesus Christ. However that looks, sounds, or feels to you, may we become instruments in the hands of God, offering up all that we are, all that we have, all that we will be, and all that we may have to building the kingdom of God on earth. Together, heart by heart, breath by breath, shaky legs and trembling voices, and our beautiful imperfections, with a broken and open heart and a contrite and humble spirit. May our joy be seen and heard and felt as we share and testify of our divine nature, the light, the truth, the way, the life of Jesus Christ. This is my humble prayer and testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
All right. Thank you, Danielle, for sharing a bit of you with us. That was inspiring. Looks like we have some questions for you guys, if you guys are ready for that. Okay. This one's directed to Nicole. Radford Bean asks, there's been a lot of pushback from conservatives and resource extraction companies in that region. How do you plan to get around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a constant struggle we've had since SUAs began 40 years ago. And that's kind of both why we work on a national scale, really bolstering support for America's Red Rock Wilderness Act on a national level. And then we also work pretty hand in hand with the Bureau of Land Management, both working to, hold the agency accountable to positive land making decisions, as well as providing logistical on the ground support through our stewardship program. And so, yeah, I think we work when we can with groups as much as possible, and kind of work at that national level to avoid that pushback.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from Danielle or Rob?
I mean, I can build on it and also answer the one that Tom dropped just in the chat about, this is, SUA is really the experts on this, but just thinking about exploring messages around shared heritage, public lands, leaving legacies for future generations. You're never going to get the extraction companies to vote with you or to support you, but what you're really trying to do is remove their basis of political support. And so think also about potential coalition partners who might be willing to stand up against oil and gas interests, who has other visions for Utah and Arizona and Nevada's economic development. And then, yeah, again, be aware of the regulatory and judicial tools, but don't use them as a substitute for organizing. Don't just assume that you'll be able to win these lawsuits, but be reaching out and thinking carefully and critically about how do we support public lands. And then think about the rising generation. Set up paper prizes and scholarships around public lands, protecting Utah's wilderness, not just in environmental studies programs, but in law programs, political science programs, history programs. I realize this also takes resources, but as you help students engage with that, that's something that they carry with for the rest of their lives, is this greater awareness of public lands. I think also, I mean, just the example I come to is there's been a real push in progressive circles recently away from taxpayer funds because we're all taxpayers in one way or another, and focus on public funds, this idea of a public trust. How are we using the public's money to support, therefore, public programs rather than private business interests? And I think really emphasizing on public lands rather than federal or government lands might be potentially viable.
Yeah, I'd also like to add kind of building the support from the base up, kind of like what Rob was saying, when we do education and outreach, whether that be speaking to groups of students like Rob mentioned, whether that be speaking to groups like yourselves, the MESA group, and tabling events, kind of outreach events, even being out on the ground and connecting with folks kind of in the Utah desert is a really great way to build support. I mean, we at SUA have been working for as long as we've been organizing, 40 years, kind of building that really grass bottoms base of support. And a lot of that looks like having folks write letters to the editor, having folks fill out postcards to their senators and legislatures, and I think SUA is really, really unique in the sense that we're organizing on that national scale. So we have, folks across the Wasatch Front who support what we're doing. That builds that mass movement and political power. And then we span out nationally and have that grassroots support, in all 50 states. So that's a really great way. And building up advocates, building up activists, asking folks to speak on behalf of the Red Rock and continue advocating even where, I can't myself go everywhere. So kind of inspiring folks around me to do what they can as well. And I'm seeing, is SUA still hosting volunteer events? Yes, we have lots of volunteer opportunities. We have ways for folks to get out into the Utah desert, and that would be through joining one of our conservation projects, which you can find on our website. And if you're interested in more kind of activism and organizing volunteer opportunities, please reach out to me at nicole@sua.org. I'll put my email in the chat, but that's a really great way to kind of get plugged in on different campaigns we're working on and ways we really need that grassroots support.
Awesome. Thank you for your responses. Danielle, I have one specifically for you. I was touched by your experience with your Heavenly Mother. How do you use your great vision of your Heavenly Mother to find the courage to talk in a state conference about this great beauty? And don't you get pushback?
Oh, thank you. I'm really humbled to be with all of you guys. I'm learning so much from you, and I do know that what I shared was quite different than the vibration that is shared. But ultimately, the similar note, right, is nature, and I think that when we try to understand how to be healthy and whole and like in this human body, those answers are around us. And like love one another, like you love your neighbor as yourself. There we go. Like our neighbor is earth, our neighbor is nature. And when we look at that relationship around us, the harmony and balance, like I was trying to love myself, right? I felt worthless. I felt defeated. I felt dis-ease in my body. When I turned that conversation inward, that connection to nature, that is what I experience as Heavenly Mother. Heavenly Mother and Heavenly Father, masculine and feminine, which we witness outside in nature, we understand as deity. What is that like inside my body? And when I got quiet and I closed my my physical eyes, and I felt that in my body. I was led to, like I said, that starfish, that belly on the earth, my navel connection to the ground, like literally anchored to her. And I think when we take moments to sit in panels like this and to learn from these incredible people who have so much education, we create more momentum around that value system, that culture. We cultivate it, which means it's an action, and we step forward. We share our note. We sing our song. And that looked like me at state conference. Yeah, my legs were shaky, my voice was trembling, but you know what? My thing is like, let your freak flag fly, like be you, play your note. Like we need that. And it may not be the same as other people, but it inspires them to play their note. And I think that's what it's all about. So thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your response. Okay, so we have a real quick one for Rob. Other than private land trusts, how can we move/justify God's ownership of creation rather than individual private ownership? So move to and justify God's ownership of creation rather than individual and
and
private.
that's a lot about, I mean, again, that's partly how we talk about it and just thinking through. And I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'd already discussed about building this coalition around this idea. I mean, also just being mindful of, you know, we have this problem sort of in Mormonism, right? Where we have Pioneer Day, but also pioneers for the settler colonial, not always in harmony with nature, not always, very often, not particularly good relations with indigenous peoples whose land they were taking over. And so thinking through also about ways to not be bound by the past. Just because we can't find it in history does not mean that a future is not possible. And so talking about public lands and explaining why they're important, highlighting stories of people protecting them, highlight why we want to keep them, why we want to leave a legacy for future generations, and what damages that legacy, and why I mean, I was on a geology trip my freshman year at BYU, walking around San Rafael Swell, and they're talking about how they were excited for fracking. Like the shale was useless until we could figure out like how to extract the oil from it, because this was just before they'd figured out the fracking technologies. And you know, just thinking about how much money has been spent on fracking that could have gone to more sustainable energy sources that could be benefiting Utah. And so just getting people to expand their minds a little bit, be a little bit more imaginative about what land is for, and how we embrace it, how we focus on it. I realize it's a hard slog, especially when we have this very sort of entrenched libertarianism built around private property and private ownership. But yeah, like you need to teach and build coalitions and work in partnership as best as you can.
Okay, real quick follow-up for you, Rob. That background picture, any particular significance to that?
It's just a good background picture. I'm at a conference in Charlotte. I'm one of the other lines on my vita is I'm vice president of policy outreach at Carolina Forward. And this is our standard Zoom background. It's of the mountains in North Carolina. And just, it's a good sort of fill-in of, yeah, this is our state. We like it. It has a lot of public lands. And again, they're not really that much of an issue here. So it's always interesting to read the Trib or the Desert News or the Arizona Republic and have all this controversy. It's like, no, we should protect our natural beauty and we should, have reasonable rules about accessing it.
Awesome. Well, thank you three so much, Daniel, Nicole, and Rob. We've really appreciated your thoughts that you've shared with us and your experience that you bring to the table. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful session. Excuse me. I'm still kind of thinking through all the different implications of all of those things that you guys brought up. We are going to break now for 10 minutes. We'll be starting up again at 10:45 for our second general session. And in the meantime, we are also going to have some music provided. So Tal and McCall Haslam are both New Yorkers. McCall is studying violin at Juilliard, and Tal is pursuing a musical career as a guitarist. You can learn more about them on the Instagram that's going to be linked in the chat. So you can enjoy that, take a break, get a snack, whatever you need to do, and we will see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Rachel, I'll just mention real quick as well. This is Soren, who's monitoring the anchor location. A lot of people responded to the chat request for the word cloud. So Julia, if you want to share the results of that and put that up while we head into our break, that might be great as well.
Thanks everyone who added a word to the chat.
Thank you, Julia, for putting together this little engaging opportunity for people to participate in and share some ideas. Julia is our social media and communications intern with MESA. She's been with us since about the middle of July, and we're really grateful. If any of you are interested in following us on our social media, we're on most common platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and she does an amazing job of sharing information and resources. And we want to thank Julia for all of her work, helping to put together some engaging opportunities during the event today. We wish we could be in social, but we've got speakers and participants from all over the country, and that makes it really hard to do. So it's fun to have these opportunities for engagement. While we take a break, I'm going to share a video and a couple of videos that we hope you will find inspiring and uplifting. And I'll go ahead and do that now. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
Whenever I hear the song of a bird, or look at the blue sky, whenever I feel the rain on my face, or the wind as it rushes by, whenever I touch a velvet rose, or walk by a lilac tree, I'm glad that I live in this beautiful world Heavenly Father created for me. He gave me my eyes that I might see the color of butterfly wings. He gave me my ears that I might hear the magical sound of things. He gave me my life, my mind, my heart. I thank him
Well, I hope you are all refreshed and rested from our break. I'm very excited to start the second general session, where we can talk about how we can bridge the divide that sometimes exists between religion and environmentalism. And I will turn the time over to our moderator, Tom Kane, who is with Citizens Climate Lobby LDS Action Team. Tom?
Good morning, everybody. Wasn't that a wonderful morning? It's just really inspiring. And I wanted to start by thanking that we had music on the break. Music is one of those miracles, and we're looking for miracles right now in this work, and I found it inspiring this morning. My name is Tom Kane. I'm an attorney by trade and a mediator by trade, but more particularly for today, I'm one of the leaders of the Latter-day Saint Action Team for Citizens Climate Education and their lobbying arm, Citizens Climate Lobby. And our mission at Citizens Climate Lobby is to join together with brothers and sisters in and out of the church to create the political will to maintain a livable world. And personally, I'd like to add that we often think of virtue as the things we do individually, but we now know in this great work and most of what we do, it's what we can do together. So we are going to have another wonderful session with three great speakers, but I think, I'm not sure who's coordinating this, but I think we have a Google poll that's going on. Do we have that going on? And there it is. Thank you very much. And so if you would, all of you within my voice, if you'll go on and let's see what we know about these questions. It's just a warm-up to find out what we know and don't know. And as we come back in, some people are still coming back into the meeting. So go ahead and mark your ballots if you would. And then we'll then take a look and see what things we know. And while you're doing that, let me just comment on these great speakers that we had this morning. Wasn't it astonishing to see the variety of approaches and viewpoint that they brought to us? Anne Neville from the Nature Conservancy and the great work that they've been doing, to hear about the management of bird refuges. And then we had Nicole Milovitz from SUA and the great work that they've been doing. I just got to know more about the America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. That's just too exciting to think about. Wilderness designation. Things that I'm in California. I'm a member of the Berkeley, California ward. And there's so much going on, particularly in southern Utah, that I just don't know about, and I wish I did. And then we heard from Rob Tabor, North Carolina, and how great to have a historian and a faith perspective going on there. And then lastly, we heard from Danielle Gilmore, and once again stretched our view of who we are as physical beings and human beings and spiritual beings. And she shared her great vision about and suffering that comes with great visions to understand the role of her Heavenly Mother and Father. So we've got some polls here going on your screen. I don't see the results yet, but but they should be popping up. Is it time let's see. Is it time for us to go through and look at the correct answers? So I'll read the question. I think it's time. So what is the first national park established in the United States? Your choices are Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, and Zion. The correct answer is Yellowstone. That's a good one. Second question is, during Roosevelt's term in office, how many acres of land were protected? I could never guess this in about 120 million years. And 120 million acres, 180 million acres, 280 million acres, or 310 million acres. And the correct answer is 230 million acres were protected in Roosevelt's term. The next question I happen to know because it was a big deal in the San Francisco Bay Area. What year was Earth Day celebrated for the first time? 1970, 1940, 1932, 1961. Correct answer, 1970. If only we could go back to 1970 with what we know now. The next one is, which agency primarily focuses on the preservation of natural environments and cultural heritage? Your choices are United States Forest Service, our friend, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, or the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. And I think most of you know the correct answer for that one is National Park Service. And the last, no, not the last one. The next question is, what is the main difference between preservation and conservation as it pertains to public lands? And there's 4 possible answers about preservation and conservation. And it doesn't tell me what the correct answer is. So to tell you the truth, I don't know. I wish I did. So somebody will fill me in on that. And lastly, what year were both Grand Canyon National Park and Zion National Park established? Correct answer, 1919. So thank you for playing. And David Arnold is letting us know that Earth Day and the EPA were created when Richard Nixon was the president, which is a great reminder that our values are shared values, common values, not political values at all. And so much of the great legislation, the Clean Air Act and so much else that we have succeeded on through bipartisanship has come through the Republican Party. So anyway, are we ready to move forward here? I think we are. Rachel, do you want to come in for a minute? Okay. All right. So welcome to the second general session. We've got 3 great panelists today. The first I'd like to introduce is
just a quick correction. There's 4 panelists, and I hope you have all 4 of them.
2, 3, 4. Yeah, if I could only count, my life would be much better. I've got John Wallingford, Jeremiah Scanlon, Representative Gay Lynn Benyon, and Kira Smiley. So I have 4 panelists. Thank you. And one other reminder before I jump into the introduction, please put your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen. They prefer that they go to the Q&A button. Okay, well, let me jump in by welcoming and thanking John Wallingford, our first panelist. He is trained in nutrition and metabolism. There's John. And he's worked professionally at the FDA and the Wyeth Nutrition before completing his career as a consultant in the area of regulation of foods for special dietary uses. now nearing retirement, as am I. He has undertaken to devote energy towards environmental care. With the congregation of St. John's Episcopal Cathedral and co-sponsors from Whitworth and Gonzaga University, he organized Hope for conferences in 2022 and 2023 to encourage faith communities' environmental care. He's met through that environmental-minded persons across many sectors of society, and in and around Spokane, officials of city, county, and federal government. This is a great collection, John. Tribal members, academics, faith groups, the business community, and non-governmental environmental organizations. He sits on the Environment Committee planning at Expo 50, the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Spokane's Expo 74, the first ever World's Fair dedicated to the environment. Boy, what a great idea that is. He is certified as a Master Forest Steward by the University of Idaho. So thank you for being with us, John. We're grateful for you being here.
Thanks very much, Tom, and my thanks to MESA for this opportunity. It's an extraordinary one, and it's in line with what Tom was saying in the outset, that I've spent the last few years working to create a greater dialogue across a variety of faith communities about our shared interests in stewardship of the earth. And I welcome this opportunity to be able to speak with the Mormon community. It's really terrific. So I'm going to try to share my screen. I grew up in an environment where you talked from your slides, so I'm going to try to do that. Okay, there we go. So the title of my talk is Interfaith Perspectives. Can you folks see that? I'm not seeing my own. And I'm not hearing if someone.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
You
great.
might not be able to see it, but we can see it as an audience.
Okay. So interfaith perspectives is clearly something that is too much to cover in 5 minutes. What I think I can do is use this time to share how much value we've obtained by creating an environment that has established a new community, a broader community across different kinds of faith groups. And we've had great participation in each of our 2 conferences. So my disclaimers, I think Tom already read through. I'm a layperson. I'm coming into this as a matter of conscience and stewardship that stems from my faith. And I'm going to use my time to explain how that faith has informed and directed my work. We did have these 2 earlier conferences, the Hope for Creation Conference, back in 2022 and 2023, with a variety of groups. And I'll just use this as a jumping off point to say there is such a broad interest in caring for creation in secular and in faith communities. And my number one take home from working to put these conferences together is people are very interested and eager to speak and to share their perspectives. So we had government officials, we had tribal leaders, and as Tom went through the variety of groups that participated in our conferences, and we had great collaborations from the academic institutions in Spokane. So I encourage you to use this topic as a way of reaching out into the community that you might not otherwise have a chance to interact with. And I know that the symposium today is directed at public lands. I'm focused on that now. I would like to have some time, and don't today, although maybe since we've got a couple of attorneys on the program, we could talk about what the rights are that accrue to private land. There's this bundle of rights concept with possession and control and enjoyment, disposition and exclusion. And maybe we can come back to that in the discussion period of where there's a boundary between public and private rights and how to balance those. And I focus on this book that came up as we were preparing our second conference, Book by Land, that was my first introduction to the bundle of rights. And I'll come back to some of the points that were made in that book as we go. Also, my apologies for joining late. I was in the Pacific time zone and I completely forgot to adjust my time. So I missed the earlier presentation by Nicole. So I hope this isn't redundant with what she said. But I would use this recent public lands proposal by the Bureau of Lands Management to suggest that we are at an important juncture in redefining the nature of public lands. So the Bureau of Lands Management in April proposed to add conservation as a permitted use of public lands, meaning that you would be able to petition for a lease to use the land for conservation or restoration purposes. And I think it's the leading edge of a concept that deserves a lot of support. We're looking at now bringing into the sphere of uses, and I have that word in quotes for a particular reason. I'll get to that in a second. The idea of using the land to not use the land is a great concept. Recognize the rights of the land itself in a land ethic. So keep that in mind as an area of work. I will say we wrote comments to that docket, and as in my history of occupation, I was a federal employee, so I know a little bit about the process of writing regulations, and I appreciate from that experience that the comments of an individual US citizen on a proposed rule can change the mind of the government. It happened in my experience. And I want to use that to say, don't be shy to engage in public rulemaking, because you can have a big voice and make a difference. There were 227 comments submitted to this proposal. I'm embarrassed. I think that was a gross under response given the importance of this issue. So I'm eagerly awaiting to find out how the Bureau of Lands Management is going to respond to those comments, and there may be a second chance for input. I'm going to skip over that one and come back to it later. So how does faith inform my environmental stewardship perspective? I'm going to give a few different areas. The first is scripture. The second is in the Episcopal Baptismal Covenant. The third is in the relationship to other cultural influencers that are greatly important to me. And then finally, returning back to my training as a chemist and nutritionist, how I see science and faith converging into common care. I've taken from Genesis 1, the creation story that I think we're all familiar with, to make a particular point. Here in Genesis 1, in verse 3, God created the light, and in verse 4, saw it was good. In verse 9, separated the waters from the land, and 10, saw it was good, and so forth and so on. And you get down to where after man was created, what was God's response? And the answer is nada. That common response of saying it was good was held until God saw everything he had made in verse 31, and it was very good. And I think I've held on to this because I think it makes a really important point, and we gloss over it all the time because we think we have dominion, we have control, we have responsibility, we can do things. But it's in that context of the whole of creation that man can be part of what is very good, not alone from creation. So don't let that go. And a second scriptural reference in the second book of Genesis, one of the classic verses informing environmental care is this Garden of Eden setting, when the Lord God then took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate is this particular translation's word, but I put in parentheses other words that are also legitimate translations from the Greek: to till or to tend, to work for, to serve, to keep the land, and to care for it. This translation work was explored greatly by Ellen Davis, a professor of theology at Duke University, in a book, Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture, which I highly recommend. And her bottom line, the four cornerstones of her conclusions from this study of Scripture, of the relationship between man and land, are summarized here. The land comes first. If the land is well tended, society will flourish. And Davis points out this is a covenant, that the covenant between God and man depends on the tending of the land. And she says what's not said, but is just as true, is that if we fail in this covenant, the land can be lost. Her second point is that informed ignorance is the result of a good education. And by that, she means we are 1,000,000 times more ignorant than we are knowledgeable. I'm going to show in my next to last slide a number of different areas of biology that we show how much we've learned, and physics and astronomy. And yes, we've learned a lot as a species. It's terrific. But we're also ignorant of a lot. So let's pay attention to what we don't know. The third one is an acknowledgement that materialism is necessary and that the land provides for that materialism. So let's acknowledge that, but let's also approach the usage for material goods in moderation. And I love to recall, when I see this phrase, the Billie Holiday line from God Bless the Child that says, "You can help yourself, just don't take too much." And then her final point is that the land has value beyond price. And I think that's one of the things that's just creeping into the discussion now, that the land has intrinsic value of its own, independent of man's use of that land. This slide is my Episcopal background. We have in our baptismal covenant a series of questions. They're outlined here on the right. I'm not going to go through them, but the answer to each one of those questions is, I will, with God's help. And I think that is a really important statement that I'm hearing is applicable in the Latter-day Saints community, just like it is in the Episcopal community, that we have a responsibility to act. And I think I've come to feel comfortable in thinking about this responsibility, because I got into this area and I thought, what is it about the section of the Christian community that is resistant to taking action? And I heard, well, their perspective is that whatever's happening now is God's plan. And that seemed to be insurmountable until I realized that as an Episcopalian, I've committed to do my part, and that must be part of God's plan too. My last point on this is that I had the good fortune of having our presiding bishop from the Episcopal Church at the cathedral in Spokane the day after our conference. And so I had the opportunity to ask the bishop if he wouldn't look into adding an additional pledge in our baptismal covenant that goes beyond the pledges for how we will respect our faith and our neighbors, but also to respect the creation. And he's said he'd look into that. So I'm encouraged that, yes, once again, one voice might help move things along. So coming up to the end here, I have a couple of things to show. This Aldo Leopold book, if you've not read that book, it's a cornerstone of the land ethic. I think it's written in poetic language and persuasive language. And similarly, Wendell Berry's 1978 publication, The Unsettling of America, where this still vibrant author and philosopher and farmer puts forth his ideas of the correct relationship between man and the land is laid out. Those are really important books. But Chief Sealth's comment I wanted to quote because it has a kicker. This we know, the earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the earth, he does to himself. So our native tribes can teach us a lot, and that interesting element in the Bureau of Lands Management proposal was a requirement to consider indigenous knowledge to inform proper care of the land. I think there's a second element in that Bureau of Lands Management proposal, not just for the ability to conserve land, but what to consider when deciding how to conserve land, that we should take an interest in. My last points are on science. I was trained in chemistry. This 0.529 times 10 to the minus 8 centimeters is the average distance between the proton in the hydrogen atom and the electron atom in that atom. And we know that with precision. That's amazing. We know how to use microwave ovens to heat the bond in water, to stretch that bond, and when it collapses, it creates heat and cooks. We know how to do that. We know in my own work that there's a vitamin A molecule in your eye that is sensitive to light and flips when a photon of light hits it and starts your vision process. We know that fungi in the forest are rudimentary from time immemorial that provide nutrients for the plants in the forest. I know that I can talk to my daughter in Japan and not have any hesitation in the phone communications. That's an amazing thing. So here's this image from Hubble of the pillars of creation, looking into space. Things that we have learned are great, and we know a lot about the environment now, scientifically, that is aligned with what faith has told us is our responsibility. I put the last one on because I'm a chemist. Atmospheric carbon dioxide, if it reaches the water, like the ocean, will equilibrate, and it will create carbonic acid and a hydrogen proton, which means whatever else is happening with global warming or sea level rise, we're also creating an acid ocean with profound potential consequence on life. So we have to act. My takeaway is we are a part of creation, this natural world that is very good, and that we can have an effect with God's help, that what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves, and that science and faith are not misaligned, they're in convergence on good stewardship of the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. A lot of food for thought. We're really grateful to you for sharing those. And it's amazing how much we share in common with our faith. Our next panelist is Jeremiah Scanlon. Jeremiah is an avid bird watcher and a fiction writer. And he's currently in his third year at law school at Harvard Law. He's been a student attorney with the Animal Law and Environmental Law clinics on campus. And he serves on the boards of the Harvard Law Latter-day Saints and the Harvard Animal Law Society. So we're thrilled to have you, Jeremiah, and take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you, John, for that great presentation. I'm also going to try sharing some slides. I guess someone shout out if it doesn't work. I'm going to assume that it's working. It turns out that a lot of what I wanted to share has actually already been shared by other people, so that's great. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit more about myself, hit on a few key points that I want to emphasize from what other people have said, and then that'll leave time for discussion, hopefully at the end, where we can talk more. A couple things that I forgot to include in that intro that Tom read For your perspective, in case there's interest and comments, is that previous internship experiences that I've had have included being a Defenders of Wildlife in DC, which is a national nonprofit that focuses on wildlife issues. I was at the Department of Interior this previous summer. I was actually at working with the legal team that works with the Bureau of Land Management. And then I was also at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office in their Environmental Protection Division earlier this year. So I kind of had a flavor of a couple of different experiences, nonprofit, state, federal government. Still trying to figure out what I'm going to do after I graduate, but I do hope to be in government service sooner rather than later, is kind of my interest in. That's also kind of my interest in the law too, is natural resources, environmental law, and public lands. I think is a really interesting topic that I've done a lot of thinking about, and I did some work on, like I said, at the Interior Department. I like the topic of the panel, and I think what I wanted to offer is a couple of things from my own experiences of thinking about, when I think about that topic of bridging the divide between religion and environmentalism. The thing that I thought about immediately was like how, as people of faith, perhaps we can engage with the broader environmental community, and also I'll throw in some legal thoughts in there as well. And I say that to get into it, I say that, I guess, as someone who my faith is very important to me and like really influences my interests in environmental issues. And I've always felt a little weird about that. I grew up in the East. That's why I have a picture of the Blue Jay on here. Some of you Westerners may not be as familiar with maybe more familiar with the Western cousins of the Blue Jay, but hopefully you get to see one. And so I've always had this interest from a young age for these issues. And that's what I've carried into law school. But I've often felt a bit of an oddball, a bit of an outsider, because I come to these issues from a particular angle that's influenced by my faith. And sometimes I feel like that's weird. Like maybe people don't want to talk about that. But there are two experiences that have changed that for me. On the left is Kathy Meyer. I took the animal law clinic, was an animal law clinic participant. Harvard has an animal law clinic. She's the director of it. She is a pioneer and kind of a legend in the animal legal movement. I'm interested in biodiversity issues in particular, and endangered species, and so that's why I wanted to take it. But I came into it thinking like, what are they going to think of me? This like Mormon thinks he can get involved in this. And like Kathy, like this, self-described hippie and vegan and, cool lady. What would she think? And like, it came up in our first meeting together, and she was like, "You're Mormon?" She's very extroverted and, outspoken, I would say. And it came up, and it was fine. She was interested, and if not, didn't really matter to the work. She was happy to have me on board. On the right is Andy Mergen, who is the director of the environmental law clinic here at Harvard. And I had a similar experience with him. He had been at government he had been at the Justice Department in their environmental division for 30 years. And when I asked him about government careers and was curious about what kind of path I could have there, one of the things he said to me was, at the Department of Justice, we're interested in having particularly LDS people, because they understand Western issues. They know what the environment is. And, there was maybe, I think at the time that he was there, he mentioned maybe like 2 or 3 BYU, grads. I'm a BYU grad, and not that all, we all have to be BYU grads, but there was only 2 or 3 in the entire Department of Justice's environmental division. So my point is, I think that it's important for us to show up as people of faith in these spaces, and I think it's welcomed. And if it's not welcomed, there's so many crises that are going on that I don't think that people really care. I think they're happy to have another person on the team, another person to row with them. So that's my first thing I want to say for bridging that gap, is that get involved. For me, that has meant that I hopefully will get to devote my career to it. But we can't all have that choice. And if you're someone who has only like 30 minutes on a Saturday to do that, I want to talk about a few different ways that you can also get involved from a legal perspective, and would love to talk more in the discussion section, because I'm just going to fly by a couple of these, and again, other people have already mentioned. One of them is, of course, getting involved in federal lawmaking and writing to your representatives. We had someone from SUA on earlier, and she talked about the great efforts that they're doing there. I'm going to mention SUA again because I think that they do a lot of great work in this space. But somebody else mentioned, I think too, that our environmental statutes are big ones. The Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, mostly passed decades ago and are maybe not exactly up to the challenges of today. And so if we want new laws passed, we need to be advocating for it. But you know that one. We're engaged citizens. I want to talk about something maybe that is less obvious. And real fast, I should mention too that when I'm talking about these things in terms of bridging the gap between religion and the environment, I put on this slide right before because somebody mentioned the Wilderness Act, and I was like, oh, I've got to talk about the Wilderness Act too. I think it's really interesting looking at laws insofar as we feel like the law does not reflect whatever we feel or should be the priorities of the government and the way that we have a relationship with the land. Like it's written into the law. And I think a prime example of that is comparing the Bureau of Land Management's primary statute, FLTMA, on the left and the Wilderness Act on the right. FLTMA, I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see that there's a bajillion different things that are supposed to happen on BLM managed lands, or that BLM managed lands are encouraged to be used for, including in kind of at the bottom there that they are used for resources, including minerals, food, timber. The Wilderness Act, on the other hand, has a completely different approach, and that's the way that the law was written. And I think Aldo Leopold, who's been mentioned a couple of times, I think he had a hand in writing part of the statute where it's recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, or man himself is a visitor who does not remain. And there's a huge range of different ways that we treat public lands. Everything, these are kind of maybe the two ends of it, I would say. National Park Service has Park Service lands that are more conservation minded, but not exactly Wilderness Act. So the point is, if we want to see our values in the law, we need to change the law. One of the ways to do that is by, writing your senators. The other, and arguably in some ways in today's era, the more important one is getting involved in agencies. Agencies do a ton of maybe primarily the lawmaking today. And there are ways to be involved here, which John also mentioned. And so I think that's great. This is just one example. Well, when an agency writes a rule, a lot of the times that has to go up for something called notice and comment, which means that they solicit comments from the public. And as John said, I think that regulators and people who are writing these rules, they really do take seriously these comments. In fact, they are required by law to read all of the comments and offer some kind of response to them. The public lands rule has been a very controversial one, and because of that, BLM held meetings over the summer. Earlier this year, none of them were in Utah, unfortunately, for those of you who are in Utah, but I think there were ones in Nevada and Colorado. So there are these opportunities to be involved, to submit comments, to have your voice heard, and the government is required to take notice of that. That's like difficult to do. It's hard to keep up with federal rulemaking. Like, this is a topic that I'm interested in. I don't even know half the things that the government is up to at half the time. So there are organizations that do this for us and help us kind of streamline and put issues in front of us that they think are important. So I would encourage you to be involved in those organizations, subscribe to their mailing lists. Again, SUA, I think, is a really great example. They do a lot of commenting on agency rulemaking, and they have ways of helping you have comment language that you can submit. And I'd encourage you too, that when you're submitting that comment language, that you personalize it. And I think this is a way for us to show up as people of faith, is to write about how those values influence our our decisions and the reasons that we're advocating for something. To close, I'll just echo this great thing that George Handley said. Religion is a call to faithful and moral action on behalf of what we love. And so I think, again, if what we love is the environment and we want to have faith and want to take direct action. I think that's a really important thing to do, is that our faith will to bridge that gap between religion and environmentalism. We should be acting. We should be trying to see our values put into practice. So thanks for hearing from me, and excited to hear more in the discussion and hear from more from our other panelists.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. A lot of food for thought, and from a lawyer to another, there's a lot we can do. That's great. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Representative Gay Lynn Benyon. She graduated from BYU with a bachelor's degree in English, and her husband, Jim, served 26 years active duty in the Air Force. Their 4 children were born in 4 different states. That sounds challenging. She served in Women's States Legislative Council of Utah leadership for 7 years, and she also volunteered to teach English to immigrants and refugees through English Skills Learning Center for 5 years, and served in a state chapter leadership for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. She was elected to represent House District 46 in 2020. And the district, now District 41, includes Alta, Brighton, most of Cottonwood Heights, and part of Holiday, Midvale, and Murray. She serves on the following committees: Natural Resources, Agriculture and Environmental Quality, Political Subdivisions, Administrative Rules Committee, and Veterans and Military Affairs Commission. Thank you so much, Gay, for being with us, and take it away.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone for having this event. I think I have grown a lot through the years that I've been associated with MESA. And one of the things I learned about that I've tried to get moving here in Utah is reducing school food waste. And I learned about that through MESA. I wanted to just share what brought me as a legislator to focus on the environment. As we came back to visit family years ago, we came in the plane through really horrible air quality, where you could see how bad the air quality was. And all of my 5 siblings and my parents still live here in Utah. So I thought about my nieces and nephews and the impacts of that air on their lives, and I wanted to make a difference. And so I think that's one of the things that when I joined Women's State Legislative Council of Utah, I had the opportunity to choose which committee I was on, I think, and I chose Natural Resources. And one of the most impressive experiences I had during those years was being able to bring from the University of Utah Law School, Bob Kiter and John Ruppel in the Wallace Stegner Center. I invited John Ruppel to come and share his white paper about the federal lands. And this, back when I first started in that group, we had this federalism pushed in lawsuits that these were state lands that needed to come back to Utah. And that white paper talks about that these have always been federal lands, and that all the lands that Utah has were given to them by the federal government. I also am inspired by the district I represent to focus on the environment. If you look at a physical printout of what this district is, the majority of it is Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons. And the beauty and the water that they provide for all of us here in this valley is so critical and important that we protect and preserve it. And then I just wanted to share some of the experiences I've had as I've served on that committee and the things that I've seen that are exciting around the state. First of all, after my first session in office, I had the opportunity to have a volunteer intern, and I asked her to look through our legislative audits on natural resources. And she found that the Watershed Restoration Initiative, which is a program unique to Utah, that for the past 17 years now, I think, has been improving our watersheds. every dollar that is put into them results in $5 of benefit to Utah through their collaboration with the federal government and counties and nonprofits. And we were able to put that watershed restoration into state code because of her work. And that sounds like it wasn't maybe that big a deal, except as we were drafting the bill, Summit County reached out and said, can you create an endowment fund so that when we have money, we can give it to the Watershed Restoration Initiative and then use it the following year to do work in our county. So we did that. They gave $1 million the first year, $10 million the next. So we're able to, as we collaborate, really improve and increase our efforts to improve the land and watersheds. Another exciting experience I've had is to see the collaboration between our state and federal governments. Last year, we were invited to go on a tour of Beaver Mountain and see the work that has been done there to reduce the risk of wildfire and to pull out dead wood and have prescribed burn. And that was wonderful for me to see the collaboration, because there is a great deal of amount of pushback in our state. And I was able to lock eyes with Director Reg Johnson and acknowledge the progress that they are making together. And I've been able to go and see this work happening in our watersheds currently in Mill Creek Canyon. And one other exciting thing I was able to do this past summer is out in Eagle Mountain. They are working on creating a wildlife corridor crossing. And this is a nonprofit grassroots group working with the city, working with the Douglas Proving Grounds to create this protected wildlife crossing through fences, through under roadway pathways to get the deer and other wildlife through this new city that has moved so far into undeveloped land in a safe way. So that was very encouraging for me to see. That city, Eagle Mountain, has their own city biologist. That's how dedicated they are to trying to remediate the impacts that they are putting on the land there. And then just a few more things. I wanted everyone here to know that there is a bipartisan Great Salt Lake Caucus. It is not meeting often enough, but we do meet. Last session, we met every week of the session. We need to meet more during the time outside of the session. Representative Doug Owens is fundamental to keeping that group going, and I'm glad to serve on that. And I want to acknowledge the work that I'm doing right now with Soren Simonson and other people in our state on riparian corridors. We have a working group and a bill to hopefully within the next 5 years that each city and county within our state will have a vision of what they want for their riparian corridor, and that we will be providing the tools and information and staff to help them find their riparian corridors and to create the vision and begin the work of what they want. And I can talk more about any of that during the question. And I think for a lot of us, this is a time when our faith is pushed. I served a mission for this faith in Mexico. I've been a part of this church throughout the country, serving in leadership throughout the country. And yet right now, as I see and think about things like protection of our leadership when they know of sexual child abuse, it's very painful for me to stay in the church. There are other things that are, particularly in my family, with LGBTQ members, I would like them to feel more welcome within the church. And so I'm grateful for a group like this that helps us all be honest with each other and helps me see the breadth of people that are within religion and working on these issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Representative Benyon. Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Kira Smiley, and briefly, she's a senior program manager for Project Title at X. I can't wait to hear about that. the Moonshot Factory, formerly Google X, working on developing high impact technologies to unlock sustainable long-term productivity and economics of the ocean while managing, protecting, and restoring. Before title, she worked as a program manager for Project Delta at X, a team focused on creating smarter food systems. Outside of her day-to-day role, Kira co-leads the sustainability working group within her Women at X employee resource group. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Earth Systems with a minor in Japanese and a Master of Science in Earth Systems, focused on sustainable global food security and the environment. While at Stanford, she was awarded the Dozier Public Engagement Award from the American Association for the Advancement of Science for her work as part of the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion program, and a 2018 Stanford Earth Systems Award for outstanding research. So thank you for being here, Kira.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be able to speak with everyone and humbled by everyone's introductions and comments before this. I'll try and keep my introduction and initial thoughts brief so we have some time for discussion. But in addition to the introduction, I wanted to share that my lens on environmentalism and of course my background with religion has intersected in lots of different ways. First and foremost, I think it's been split between doing a lot of community engagement and organization through work with wards, with my own LDS student group while I was at Stanford, and wards after that in working to really engage and get involved with, for example, building out a role or an actual calling around environmental stewardship coordinator and working to build out tools and resources, toolkits, so that we can have events and so that we can hold space for doing work with environmentalism. At the same time, today, my role and what I do at X really comes on not so much from an NGO or a political or a legal lens, but really from an economic lens, where we are first and foremost creating technologies and products that we think and that are actually proving value while being environmentally sustainable. And so that is to say that often we see that there may be some conflict between what is seen as something that is more government driven or trying to be more NGO driven, but really there is a lot of value to be had also from an economic sense in terms of promoting sustainability, promoting environmentalism, and promoting the tools and technologies and businesses that can help create that and can help perpetuate that as part of society. So my background, beyond what was mentioned, I've done some work across various different areas. That includes the Center on Food Security and the Environment at the Freeman Spogli Institute, working at the Finnish Environment Institute, working at the National Audubon Society, which Jeremiah, I'm sure, will appreciate, and working in Japan at the Mitsubishi Research Institute for energy and environment. And in 2020, I had the opportunity to speak with Sister Eubank at the Fall Forum with the LDSES organization, which may have some crossover here with MESA. But what I thought was really interesting out of that was we often, even the topic of this this conversation, which is how can we bridge the divide that sometimes exists between religion and environmentalism, I would take a step back and say, I honestly don't think there's necessarily a bridge between religion and environmentalism. I think that there's other identity roles that we have and incorporate that have caused some of that rift. And I think it's really critical that we don't stay very myopic to specifically thinking about our roles in this divide, which is fairly US focused. I am actually a dual citizen between the US and Finland. And what I've seen is the type of divide that we have today and the sort of reticence to adopt environmental principles because we see some kind of conflict there with other identities that we hold is something that is very, very American centric and not something that I see globally necessarily. And so taking that global perspective, I think is really important. The other piece to this is actually, I think it was John who mentioned the love thy neighbor as thyself. And I think that today, something that's really critical that we think of is loving thy neighbor as thyself. Today, the world is so interconnected and so completely, intricately involved with itself and with each other that it is impossible to see your neighbor as anyone else than people all across the planet. Because worldwide, all of the choices and all of the things that we do have a direct impact on others. And the systems that are in place also lead to that. And so what I would say maybe as a main point here is that if we can look to reframe what we see as environmentalism, which nomenclature has been sort of co-opted and held tightly by the political left, and reframe that as something that is much more human-centric and human-focused around brotherhood and sisterhood, around stewardship, and around human-centric impacts, which for better or for worse, really for worse, now are very visible in a way that they weren't even a decade or 2 decades ago. Then we start to be able to really focus on that, love thy neighbor as thyself, really being able to focus on taking those stewardship principles and seeing it as a gift and something we're responsible for caring for. And so I think that's something that we can really focus on doing. And I would love to have a discussion with the other panelists about is how do we pull in the religious texts, the talk from our leaders, from, for example, Elder Caussé, we've heard from Neil A. Maxwell, from Elder M. Russell Ballard, Elder Stephen E. Snow, many different talks around this who are starting to speak more publicly about environmentalism. And how do we leverage that to create a much more inclusive conversation such that people don't feel alienated and people feel like they can be part of it because it's just impacting their day-to-day lives and their health and their family. And if we can start doing that, then I think we can start leveraging and really rapidly expediting the progress that we've been making to this point with this work on environmentalism and really begin to bridge that gap. So that's primarily, I'll keep it very short. And so that's primarily the main point I want to make. And I'm excited to now move more into conversation and start having that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara. That's wonderful. And we've got a lot of great questions that we can ask the panelists as a whole. We could start with Kara's question, if you want to do that, which is, how do we leverage these great statements by Bishop Caussé, Elder Ballard, Elder Snow, and so forth, and to not feel alienated and marginalized? How do we bridge that gap? So let me turn it over to the panelists.
If I can jump in and speak just initially to that, I think one piece that's interesting specifically within the context of the United States is that if we look at, I mentioned many identities, right? So within US Christianity, primarily it's about 61% are identified, or 36% of adults across the US who are religious identify as conservative and 33% as moderate. Within the US, it's about 61, or within the US with LDS members, it's actually 61% is conservative identifying and 27% are moderate, which is higher than any other religious group. But I think that what we've seen historically is that it was only around maybe the Al Gore era that environmentalism became much more associated with the political left. And what we saw before that was, someone mentioned this, but the EPA, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, those were all created under a conservative presidency. And so that is to say that if we can have people sort of take their mindset and focus less on that part of it and more on their identification as someone who is a steward, who is a brother and a sister, who is a family member, and and have them really dig into that part of their identity and their identity as a follower of Christ, then I think that you create the mental space to be much more open to starting to engage is one piece that I would add.
Great. Other panelists want to speak to that?
I'd love to. Oh, sorry, John, did you have
No, that's
something? No, I think that's a great point that you made, Kira. And yeah, something I've thought about and maybe definitely want to keep thinking about. My first thought is just like on the very simple, like within our leveraging our whatever we can within our communities to like bring up these topics in a way that kind of conforms with like the project of community. That's kind of vague language. I'll say for me personally, I'm the Sunday school president in my ward. And so I'm like, why have we not had a lesson on Bishop Caussé's talk? Like that would be fantastic. I don't know if that's happened. And then the second thought, I mean, I guess just to echo what you're saying, some like specific examples of like tapping into people's identities that they already have to work towards good and see how those things overlap. I think, there's a lot of ways to interact with, I hope, with people who come at conservation maybe from like a recreationist standpoint or from like a sportsman standpoint. I think often there are times to have opportunities to have conversations with people who are interested in those issues who maybe also don't want to see extractive uses, or at the very least, we can find ways to overlap on the things that we care about and maybe learn from other people as well. Yeah.
Can I just come back to Kira's comment about our different identities? I think I mentioned in my earlier comments that one of the surprises to me was when I was thinking of the American Christian community, that there were parts in that community that were the most vocal opponents to environmental care. That the conversation in their words was about it's our use of the land. We can do what we need to do and exploit. And I think that's a result of a failure in our religious instruction. So it's overcome in conversation by getting out of your comfort zone and getting across into other communities so that they know there's a Christian community that is very much aligned with other people's interests.
Thank you so much, John. Any other responses to that question? Because we're just about out of dialogue time, I very much regret to say. Any other closing comments? There's been many questions here for each of the panelists. I'm sorry we don't have time to get to them because they're great questions and great panelists, but we have run out of time. So let me turn it back over to Rachel Lorison of MESA.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all the panelists. I think there's so many things that we could dive into, and I wish we did have more time, but hopefully this will prompt other conversations and thoughts and readings amongst each of the participants here and in our communities. We will go ahead and go to our final section, which is our closing address by Dr. Farina King. And I'm honored to be able to introduce her. She is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and is the Horizon Chair of Native American Ecology and Culture, as well as an Associate Professor of Native American Studies at the University of Oklahoma, and the homelands of the Hasinés, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, or the Caddo Nation, and Wichita and affiliated tribes. In 23 to 24, she has been serving as the interim department chair of Native American Studies at OU. She's the author of various publications, including The Earth Memory Compass, DNA Landscapes and Education in the 20th Century. She's the past president of the Southwest Oral History Association, 21 to 22. She directed and founded the NSU Center for Indigenous Community Engagement. Her research traces the changes in Diné educational experiences through the 20th century, using a hybrid approach of the Diné Secret 4 directions. As I said, we are honored to have you, Dr. King, and we are looking forward to hearing your address.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, thumbs up. All right. And I don't know if I would be able to share my screen if I want to show some images. Is that okay? Okay, awesome. Well, yat everyone. Thank you for having me here. I know there's a quick move with everything, and so there's so much that we can all talk about, and I hope this is just a beginning for many of us to continue our conversations. And this is a beautiful time of year to have these conversations. For the month that we identify as November. It also is harvest time to many people, and a time of gathering, of giving thanks and gratitude. And that is always intertwined with a sense of place and all the gifts, all the blessings of the earth and everything that comes with that. And there's much prayer and song that this time means for all of us. I also want to acknowledge that this is Veterans Day, and one veteran had a very powerful influence on me, was my uncle, Albert Smith. And he was a code talker during World War II, a Navajo code talker. So I'll share some words and teachings that stay with me from him. I also like to briefly introduce myself in Dene Bazad, because that is, I think, a beginning for all of us to think about who we are, where do we come from. And for Dene, we recognize that we come from a very specific place, and that relationship with place and ecologies, that it's human and non-human. This is all a part of our kinship. It's a part of relationality, that we understand we are born and connected and always tied to the earth. And Mother Earth and Father Sky are terms that are a part of even how we greet one another, how we communicate. It's embedded in the language. And that's why also being able to speak in our languages, Dene Bazad, is so crucial to what you all are talking about of environmental stewardship and these connections, is even the terms we use. How, if we really truly see the earth as our mother, how would we treat her? How do we view her? How do we see the rocks, the trees? How do we feel them? How do we perceive them? And this is intertwined in language. And that's why our indigenous languages are so crucial. Native American, National Native American Heritage Month is celebrated in November. But to me, it's every day is Native American Heritage Month. And it's important for us to also not just nod towards an Indigenous land acknowledgement, but really understand the imprints and how we are living, breathing, learning in spaces that peoples through generations of time have shaped and influenced as well. So this is how I introduce myself in Dene Bazad. She'e Farina King Yenishye, Bilagana Nishle, Do Kiaani, Bashish Chin, Bilagana Dashache, Do Sinajani Dashanole, Akot Egoatsa Nishle. And we acknowledge our mothers and our grandmothers. So I'm of white American settler descent through my mother, and I'm born for the towering House clan and Black streaked woods people of Dene. So when I introduce my clans, people know where I'm coming from, that the Kiaani and Sinajani clans, they will be able to understand, places where Black streaks, go across the trees, or the places where we live. My father's from Seyanichi is like a red streak on the rocks, and they know these places and that they're integral. They are inseparable from who we are, and we're very mindful of that. And then when we share Done, when we talk about our clans, people know how we're related, and we have reciprocity. We have a specific relationship and responsibilities and obligations to one another. So these are teachings of kinship. And as I mentioned earlier, my uncle Albert was really crucial in teaching me this. He was one of the first in my family because I was raised in a Latter-day Saint home. Both my parents converted and joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my father was very busy working as a physician and with different kind of medical research. He worked for the Indian Health Service for many years. My mother was primarily home with 8 children, and they were very busy. Our house was a hustling place, something always happening. And when I went to visit my uncle to ask him about his war experiences, because I had a great high school teacher who encouraged me to go talk to him. I knew he was a veteran and a co-talker. She encouraged me to go and interview him for a class project. And I went and started talking to him. And he told me, well, actually, one of the first things he did was he took me to our family homelands. And so something I want to share with you are some of these images that just show a little bit. This is an image of me in a cradle board, my father and my paternal grandmother, Shanale Atsa. Her name was Johanna Haskoutsi. And my dad, when he was young, actually, this picture was from when he went on a mission for the Latter-day Saint, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my father, it was actually a major rupture for him to join the church at first with his family. His father was a Hataflet, a traditional healer, and struggled with my father joining the church. So being Latter-day Saint and Dene has been hard and is hard for individuals because of what is considered cultures, what is considered these identities and relationships. But I wanted to show you that for a class, I showed students a journey that I took and was basically tracing the steps of a journey that I followed. And I apologize if I can't fully project it on the screen for you. But my uncle, Albert, he took me on this road trip when I went to visit him and talk to him about his war stories. But something that he wanted to teach me more than anything else was, where is home and what is homeland and why is it important? So I share this with you all because while I have this very diverse background of being raised, going to primary and in the church, these teachings from my family are so integral and crucial to who I am too, and to many people, and that it's not mutually exclusive. Even while there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of hardship in different poles and what makes us, what pathways, what values, what beliefs do we pursue? And a core question, I ask people is, how do Indigenous peoples define and understand homelands? But in a way, I think this question can be for anyone. What does homeland mean to you? And one of the first stops my uncle took me to was Laguna Pueblo. That's where his wife Helen was from. She was Dene as well. I'm not going to be able to show you the video clips due to time. But why that area was very meaningful to Dene as well we have very close relationships with Puebloan people. As I said, I'm known as the Kia'ani clan, towering houses, like from what is now known as Chaco Canyon, that area. And this is one of our sacred mountains to Pueblo people, and also Dene is Zodzith, or turquoise mountain, known in English as Mount Taylor. And my uncle pointed that out to me. He was one of the first to teach me the mountain is my church. The mountains are sacred. They are living and breathing. And then he, we'd pass by Church Rock area where my father's maternal family is from. And it wasn't until later that I was an adult that I learned about the Church Rock uranium mill spill, which was one of the worst uranium mill spills in American history, arguably world history we could look into. And that happened down the road from where my family lives in 1979. But these were things that the family didn't talk about. We just thought, I did, for example, thought that cancer ran in the family. It was very prevalent and widespread, and other issues such as diabetes and such. So as I went on this journey and reconnecting with my family, is also learning and understanding, we can pass these spaces all the time, but how do we see what's right in front of us? How do we understand what's going on and how it's actually affecting all of us? Because of this uranium spill, a lot of the animals, including livestock, such as Debe, a very sacred animal to Dene, is, as Navajo we call ourselves, but Debe are the sheep, and they were being contaminated by drinking the waters that the uranium seeped into. And then peoples were eating this, right? And they didn't know, and cancer was skyrocketing from that point. And Church Rock, it's interesting, we call it that in English, but all these places have names in the Nebazad, in Navajo language, of the knowledge and aspects of what that means to people. And this is a picture of me with my uncle Albert and my aunt. And something my uncle said when we were, and I wrote about it in the Earth Memory Compass, when he actually was giving a talk about being a Navajo code talker, and it was around this time of year in November, around Veterans Day. I actually invited him to speak at Utah Valley University, and it's quoted when he's talking there. I'm probably unable to pull it up right now, but I quote it in my first book called The Earth Memory Compass. Something my uncle said was, the world is changing quickly around us. We hear of earthquakes, we hear of all these drastic changes, and the earth is speaking to us. Something is going on, and we need to listen and be the child again that listens, and look for your child's spirit and listen to that. And to me, as a Latter-day Saint, that reminded me of teachings of Christ, to be like children who have that, as a mother, I know when my children, I see them growing older and they're becoming teenagers who are asking all these critical questions and talking back and things, which is great. They're coming unto themselves. But I do miss those days when they were just little kids and ready to listen and absorb a lot, and also just pure hearts, and I'm reminded of that, of how Christ was drawn to the children and said, bring the children to me, and told us, we need to have that humility of children and that spirit. And that was one of the things as well that my Uncle Albert did, is he brought me to visit our family homelands in Bahale, Bread Springs. And that was even before he talked to me about anything else. He walked me out among those juniper trees, the land, and said, this is where we are from. This is our home. And it was this sense of shikeh, that our kinship, and the relationality that was really powerful from that experience for me. And because of those teachings, since I've talked to this group before, and I'm very appreciative and grateful you invited me to speak again. I think it's wonderful that technology enables us all to connect from wherever we are. Wherever you are, you are on a native land. Even if it's not people, right? Who are the trees that were there before people were? What are the names of the rivers? What are the names of the mountains? And not just, naming them after a president or something like that. What are the wisdom that sit within them? As I think of Keith Basso's work, if you haven't read that, his work with Apache of wisdom sits in places, that was very impactful on me and my work. And as I was taught these things, and since I've talked with this group before, I was invited to contribute to this volume called Blossom as the Cliff Rose. Oop, it's blurry. Sorry. Blossom as the Cliff Rose, Mormon Legacies and the Beckoning Wild. And they asked me to contribute something if I was interested. And actually, when I heard the title had wild in it, and I see with a lot of well-meaning initiatives, such as, to protect wilderness, we often talk using that language. I wanted to address that and bring up again this concept of homeland, of kinship, that when you all are talking about frameworks and how we think about things, language, again, indigenous language, is illuminating in this way. If we also change how we talk about the movements and talk about what matters to us. So I wrote this poem in response called Homeland. My home is not wild. My home is warm. My home is clean. My home shelters and cares. My home speaks. I know my home, not the wild. My home is the land. The land is my home. Homeland is my mother. She listens to me. I listen to her. She feeds me. She clothes me. I roll in her embrace. When I thirst, her veins of water sustain me. Her love, the sky, rains tears of kisses on her. From these kisses, life is born and cycles from infancy, adolescence, maturity to old age. We walk together in beauty to old age with family and loved ones, rocks, trees, plants, animals, the people, the net with Mother Earth. And in a new book that I've written, I know I'm like up on time here because it goes by so quickly. And I thank you for listening to me. But a new book, I actually come full circle from the Earth Memory Compass, which was my first book. And this book just came out at the end of October. Dene Do Gamali is Navajo Latter-day Saint experiences in the 20th century. And with this book, I wrote a poem based on a song that I shared in my first book, The Earth Memory Compass, as well. And it comes from a song that my father learned from his father. And as I mentioned earlier, there was some pain, some rupture in their relationship when my father decided to join the church, because I think it gets at, there's this sense with Mormonism that it is a different culture, that there's conflicts, that integral teachings of Dene, of indigenous peoples, such as Dene, our people, Navajo, of Navajo Nation, that they can't be in harmony and are mutually exclusive. And I sense my grandfather, who was Hatafle, and Dene, that means a singer. And the power of song is healing and it's connecting. And so I think that's the fears that my grandfather had when my father told him he was he believed in and had faith in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Book of Mormon. Whereas in my life, my father has always emphasized he is Dene, and he values the teachings of his ancestors, and they're very central to him, and they are for me too. And fortunately, he was able to reconcile with his father before his father passed away and walked on. But this was an honor song that my grandfather taught him, and one that my father actually would sing in church when invited to honor my brother's temple wedding or different special occasions such as that. So I wrote this poem based on that stems from commemorating the life pathways of Dene generations past, present, and future. And as you listen to it, understand that the earth is inseparable. It is entwined. It is a part of who we are as human beings. So while we talk about, our relations as people, it is crucial to understand land is kinship. Land is kin too. Not only a home as a shelter, but also a home as a mother embracing us and holding us and keeping us warm and sustaining us. Pay attention. Listen to the east. Listen in beauty. He was born and raised in beauty. Way jane, eya hade, way jane, bahajogo, way jane. Listen to the south. Hear the voices of the south. In his youth, he grew well. He went to school. Bahajogo bidish shite, do biya hoa. Hey yaho shada ade hwe hey ya jane. Binitsik yat ego bayaho a. Otako bayaho a. Listen to the west. He lived and worked in strength. His home is good. Hey ya wo jane ya jane. Binanish najogo do bezilko nina. Bechan yat ego, bith hasha. Listen to the north. Wait for the voices of the north. Hey yaho weyajane. Hey yaho naho koste. Weyajane. Weyaho weyaho weyahe. Dene bezad bihosha. For those who are Dene, I am learning Navajo. And so I hope it's a tonal language. I hope I'm constantly learning, that I continue to learn. And it's important because there's layers in that song. While I'm talking about the directions, those are mountains of the east, like I shared, and the south, such as Zodzith, the turquoise mountain, and mountain of the west, and mountain of the north. And it's tied to place. It has all these layers of significance, and not only with the directions and the earth ecologies and aspects on that physical level, but also very metaphysical as well, and spiritual. And that we know these blessings come from caring for the earth, and as we care for the earth, it cares for us. And it's not something just romanticized, mythologized as, the quote, ecological Indians, these concepts. of course, Dene and many indigenous peoples have learned to cultivate the earth, develop, change things. And that is something I want to emphasize too. As well as when we talk about those directions on a metaphysical sense and even intellectual processes, like ways of knowing, epistemologies, there is first thought and planning and reflecting, and it comes full circle to Sihasin, the north. And that Sihasin means hope. And that's what I want to leave you all with today, is whatever chaos and hardship and destruction and all the mistakes we make and our ancestors and generations have, to carry that hope that we can heal, that we can do better, and we can teach our children to do better, even when we make so many mistakes. And I think that's also a strong teaching of the gospel of Christ, is we can change and we can atone for our sins. And that includes when we do any harm, how can we be healers like the great healer, Jesus Christ himself? So I share that with you. Thank you for listening, and wish you all the best in this very special season of continue to learn from the languages and the peoples with respect of many different cultures and places, that we all have, I think, these seeds of hope and beauty, hajo, in our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farina. That was just inspired and brought up a lot of feelings for me. And I appreciate all of the work that you have done in your scholarship and in this field in particular. I do want to also thank all of our presenters. There's quite a lot of work that goes into preparing these presentations, and some of that work is very emotional as we reach within ourselves and to try to convey some of these deep felt things and tender things. And so I wanted to thank each one of you for participating in that. In addition, I would like to thank our director of productions, basically, Rebecca Ricks. You've got to hear from her a little bit, but she has done the lion's share of the work for putting on this symposium. And there was quite a lot of it to put together. And so we wanted to really acknowledge the work that she put into this as well to make this all possible. And finally, I just want to thank each of you for joining us for this conversation. There are some deep introspective things, and there are some wide, impactful things. And I think really, as I think back over all the messages, it really is a spectrum of things that we can each think on and do. It starts from the heart. And as Dr. King talked about, the hope, as well as the faith and the love for each other, for the work that we're doing, for the awareness that we're raising, and the ability to be part of this movement, to bring our land back into health and into communion with the people and the beings that live on it, human and non-human, as well as to reach out in community, in our local ways, in our families, in our wards, as well as the wider communities, and in our governmental communities, and making an impact there to be part of those voices that are influencing policy and change and bringing that scale of change needed. So thank you each for joining us, for being part of this. And I hope that this gives you a lot of things that you can not only think on, but to see what you also can bring to the conversation and the action that is going on, because there's such a wide variety of ways to be involved. We've seen from our panelists the vast diversity of scholarship, of background, and of faith that we can bring to this conversation and really make a big impact. And the more that we share that, the more others will do that as well. So thank you again. And we will go ahead and close the symposium with a closing prayer. And one of our board members, Giles Florence, will be giving us that benediction. So if we can get Giles on.